TSF is already here.
Aditya, we are live already.
Okay.
We are live on YouTube, yeah.
तुम किस जगह पोजीशन लोगे? लो ना एक जगह पर। अरे आवाज क्या हो गया रे?
Good morning. If you have joined us live on YouTube, very welcome and thanks for showing up to attend this webinar. And if you are watching this post this event, again, thanks for reaching this link and showing your interest in education and Nexus of Good. Today, we have got a stellar panel which will be focusing on education technology and what actually needs to happen in education in the context of NEP. And that's the focus of the series of webinar that Nexus of Good is creating. I will invite Mr. Anil Swarup to just come and kickstart this webinar with his thoughts and the context of why this is important.
Thank you very much, Vinod, and very good morning to all of you. What a pleasure to be amidst you all, thanks to this electronic age that we are in, or technology age that we are in, that we are able to interact despite COVID that we have around us. We have a galaxy of speakers, but before I come to those speakers, I must place on record someone who's present amidst us, is Ranjit Singh Disale. I met him for the first time when I visited the now famous school Pastepada at Pastepada, the government primary school. In fact, when I did visit that school and met with Sandeep Gund and the likes of Ranjit Singh Disale, who went on to win the international award for the best teacher. It was at that point in time that the concept of Nexus of Good got born. I got that idea. Of course, the term Nexus of Good came much later, but what I saw in that school actually made me feel that there is a lot of good that is happening around us, and unfortunately we are not noticing it. Unfortunately, we are not trying to understand it, and unfortunately we are not sufficiently propagating it. And that actually led to the start of the Nexus of Good movement, and I'm so glad we are having this series of webinars. And today is a very special one, because everyone seems to be talking about technology, but not many people know that what or the nature of the technology that could be the best for improving learning outcomes of children, because that's the ultimate objective. And I'm so glad we have speakers today, a number of them. We have Shankar Maruwada, who is a part of EdTech. In fact, I recall as Secretary of School Education, I had interactions with him, and we set up a portal called DIKSHA, which I'm so glad to learn that it's doing so very well. And I hope Shankar will talk more about it. A wonderful, wonderful EdTech initiative that will help improve quality of education in the country. We also have Ashish Dhawan, who heads the Center Square Foundation. I had the pleasure of working with him again when I was in education, education secretary. And I'm so glad that he and his team continues to do such wonderful, wonderful work. And I hope he also talks about the steps that he and his organization are taking in terms of determining the quality of the various instruments or EdTech applications that are coming. Because I sometimes I feel a bit apprehensive when I see, film stars advertising EdTech applications. I don't know what role the film stars have played in that, but they advertising it, makes me a bit apprehensive. And hence it's very, very important to somehow determine the quality of the applications that are there. We also have, I think, amongst speakers, Pranav Kothari. And I'm mentioning these names because these people may not personally know, but they have been actually the people behind this movement, which I started, the Nexus of Good movement. The webinar is a part of that movement. Pranav Kothari had interviewed me once, and the video quality of that interview was so good that we are using a part of it in the Nexus of Good, on the Nexus of Good portal, to explain to people what Nexus of Good is all about. There are many, many more speakers. Cavalier Foundation has been a very integral part of this movement, Nexus of Good. And I'm so glad there are 3 teachers from this foundation, from various parts of the country who will be saying that. But before I conclude, I welcome once again Ranjit Singh Disale and compliment him and congratulate him for the wonderful, wonderful work that he's doing. Award, of course, they come and they go. But I think the work that these people are doing, he and other teachers in Maharashtra, is an example for other teachers elsewhere in the country. So I hand it over to Vinod once again, and welcome to all of you to this webinar. I'm eagerly looking forward to these presentations. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vinod.
Thanks a lot, Anil sir, and it's always a pleasure to keep thinking and tinkering about education with you. Without any ado, Ranjit ji, thanks for being with us today. Firstly, congratulations. I think it's a true story and a true inspiration. And I really hope that it inspires the 90 lakh teachers who teach every day in India. The floor is yours. We'd love to hear your story, and I'll be keeping an eye on all the comments that is coming, and I'll probably post some questions. But all yours, Ranjitji. Welcome, and would love to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vinodji, and I must thank Swarup-ji, Anil Swarup sir, for inviting me on this platform. So I have been there on Teacher'sApp, worked with Center Square Foundation, and met Anil sir as well when he was visiting Pada. But today I'm more talking about the innovation using the technology and how technology can help us to drive the better learning outcomes. So when I joined my school in 2009, the situation was like shocking to me. One of my classroom was used as a cattle shed, and I saw the parents' indifference towards the educations, and the girls' education was given negligible importance. So the situation was really worse in terms of educational scenario. So what I did a survey of the village, and I realized the importance of education, their economical status, their educational status, their culture, their mindsets. So based on the survey and I analyzed the data, so I set up my 5 years plan of action. And the 5 year plan of action was to achieve 3 targets. So I set up 3 targets before me. So first target was that to change the mindset of parents. Second was to increase the attendance of girls up to the 100%. And the third target was to achieve the learning outcomes because schools' performance was really poor. So to achieve those targets, I had to actually work on the right directions. And the students coming to my schools were actually the first generation of learners in their family. So to compared to their companion from cities and metros, I thought that the technology might help me to bridge that gap in between them. So first thing what I did, I bought a laptop. At that time, I was a teacher, probationary teacher, you may call him, and having a salary of nearly 3,000 rupees per month. So it was not my cup of tea to buy a laptop. So I asked my father, who was a teacher, to give me the laptop. So I want to do something with the laptop. So I thought that the targets might be achieved. So he agreed, and I bought a laptop. But the first thing what I was doing, I started an initiative called as Parents Engagement Program. So continuously I was talking with parents. I shifted from Bashi to Paritewadi. I was living there and participating in their cultural events, their family programs, and trying to understand their views towards the education. And to give them importance, to understand the importance and how the important role parents can play in the education of their kids. So I started an initiative called as Alarm On, TV Off. So I set up an alarm on my classroom's building, and that alarm rings at 7 p.m. of every night. So that alarm actually, this is an indication for parents to now stop whatever they are doing, sit together with their kids, and try to help him, try to understand what what their kids are doing. So parents now feel that they are responsible. It's their responsibility to help to sit together and try to understand what his kids or the daughters are doing. But what should be their job? So I started to send them text messages at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So in the afternoon, they get realize that what they're gonna do at night. So just sending a simple text message actually helped me to get the active participation of parents, and they felt that this is their responsibility. And even students also start feeling the responsibility and taking the ownership of what they are doing at the home. So this is how gradually I involved parents in teaching learning process. Then later on, I was playing some tricks with the laptop to increase the enrollment. What I was doing, I was just going in the farm, I was going visiting their houses, taking them back to school. So every day it was my job. I was doing that. But what I saw, still there are so many girls and other students. They are living at home. They are not going to school. They are not attending the schools. So what I did, using the laptop, I started to play the movies. We were singing the song, watching the movies every day. We were not learning anything. So after watching the movies, students start enjoying. They like to come to school and watch the movies, sing a song, dancing, and then going back to home. So they then start, because I thought these students coming to my schools are actually a messenger. I want them to speak what they have done in the classroom to their friends, those who living at the houses. So they start talking with their friends. Today we have watched this movie, and tomorrow we're going to watch this one, like this. So those students, those who were not attending the school, they started to think of it, and gradually my attendance increased. And once I achieved the target one, that attendance up to the 100%, then I started to change entertainment to the edutainment. So I started to create small videos based on the content in the textbook. I downloaded some videos from YouTube and edited them using and given my voiceover. I recorded my own videos, what I'm doing in the classrooms and what I'm teaching, some concept like this. And all this digital content is now accessible to each and every students. So even they are sitting at home, I just transfer the data from the laptop to their mobile devices. We used to transfer through the memory card, and they get access to digital content whenever they want. But later on, what the problem I was facing, sometimes files get corrupted. Sometimes mobile device couldn't support the file format. So I was looking for the solution. What could be the better solution for this? So one day I went in a shop, and there I saw that the shopkeeper has scanned a QR code, and the data and the price of the product was actually displayed on the screen. So at that time I was unaware of what this is called. At that time I really didn't know this is called as QR code. So that moment actually something clicked in my mind, and I went back to home and start searching on Google. What is this? At the time, I don't know what is this. So instead of having text search, I use image search on Google, and then Google replied me, and this is called as QR code. Then I started to create QR codes, what we can do with the QR codes, what we can embed in the QR codes. So once I realized the potential of QR codes, so I created 27 QR codes for my students. I printed them on a sticker pages, and these stickers were pasted on the textbook of my students. So what was embedded in those QR codes? If it is a video, if it is a lesson, then there my students will find out the video of the lesson. If it is a poem, then they will find out the audio format of the poem. And all these QR codes were dynamic QR codes. So when the students learn something through the video, he or she has to give the online test to let me know whether he has learned something or not. So based on his performance in the online test, I change the data in the same QR codes. So this is like personalized learning experience for my students. If someone scan QR code right now, he will get the video, but later on, if he scan the same QR code, he or she will get the online test. Later on, he will get the new video explaining the different concepts. So this was the personalized learning experience for my students, and that really helped me to achieve the expected learning outcomes. And I'm very much happy to share, since 2014, we have achieved 100% attendance. 90% of students have achieved expected learning outcomes before completing their academic school year. And the idea of using QR coded textbooks has really helped me to drive the better learning outcomes. So when I realized the potential of technology, I started to experiment something different as well. Some new concept I was explaining or to implementing in my classrooms. So rather than showing them the video of any material or any place, because we know there are so many concepts in a textbook that actually really exist somewhere in the world. Let's take example of 7 wonders of the world. So these wonders are actually somewhere in the world. Let's take example of Paris. Eiffel Tower is there. So instead of watching the video of Eiffel Tower or the images of the Eiffel Tower, I started to visit Eiffel Tower virtually. So I was a part of Microsoft educators community, and there I find out so many excellent educators doing innovative practices and good job in the respective classrooms. So I requested a teacher from France, Paris, who is living in Paris, and I asked him, could you please go there at Eiffel Tower and show us what exactly he looks like? It looks like, and that was the first virtual trip we did. And when the students saw that Eiffel Tower live on the screen in our classrooms, they were amazed. They started to ask him some questions. So, what exactly the virtual field trip has helped my students to understand the concept deeply, to verify the information that been mentioned in a class textbook, and ask the question. Questioning skill is also very important for Indian students. I'm talking about for Indian students, their teachers is the only source of knowledge. But I don't want to limit my students to limit myself, or they don't have to rely on me more. So when they start engaging, they start collaborating with students from other countries. It has actually helped them to broaden their horizon and think in a different way. So they started to have their own friendship with other students. So currently, till now, we have visited more than 140 countries. We have our own passports as well. My students making a note what exactly we did in the virtual trip, where we actually went, how much distance we have traveled. So when we are organizing any virtual field trips, it's like interdisciplinary approach is there. We calculate the distance, geographical locations, the mathematics and geography going to play their role. We ask them questions, the questioning skill. It means the language skills also going to develop. So it's like multidisciplinary approach or the interdisciplinary approach using the technology is actually helping me to achieve the expected goals that I was looking for. And then later on, we started to raise our bars, and then we are going to we were engaging with Pakistani students to spread a message of peace. We have been continuously having a dialogue with them. So we don't want to limit ourselves within the India, because I personally feel the world is my classroom, and I'm more open to to teach everyone who needs me or who actually deserve the quality education. So I'm there to help millions of students, or those who wanted to change their life, to brighten their life. So these were some of the initiatives that I have taken and still going on. So I think time is running out. I have to stop myself. If you have any questions, Vinod sir, in the chat box, if you could help me to know the questions so I could answer them.
No, Ranjit, I think very, very inspiring in terms of how you are using whatever is available around you and constantly learning and integrating that in your practice. For me, I think all your students are extremely fortunate. I think the real technology is you, because you are the interface through which they're able to see the world and connect, and you are obviously enabling that. Whatever literature we read, it also shows that the best material that a child can get is what is created by their teachers. And you are obviously taking it to a different level by utilizing technology. I'm getting a lot of congratulations, so that I'm sure you're used to it by now. But a couple of questions comes in mind. My own exploration, and we had a good fortune to connect back in 2016, where we did a small story of what you were trying to do then. One thing that I noticed that a lot of teachers keep doing these little tinkering things, but often it is not recognized. Forget you getting a global recognition, but it's not even recognized within their own school because they hardly talk about it. Now, if such teachers are actually watching this, what is that one piece of advice? They're very lonely. वो अपने आप आराम से problems को solve करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. What's that one message that you want to give to them?
I think share your best practices, start talking about yourself, then ultimately sharing is growing. If you're not going to talk about yourself, if you're not going to share what you're doing in the classrooms, so the world would not recognize you. So I've been in touch with National Geographic Network, in Microsoft Network and Google's network. So these type of nexus will really help you to develop professionally as well. It gives you the vision to look at the world in different aspects. So my advice will be just start talking, because I saw so many teachers who doing excellent job, but they're not talking about themselves. They feel that it's not our role. Even they don't want to share their best practices with the media persons as well and other things. So I think in the 21st century, teachers in the government school should start talking about their best practices, what they are doing in the classrooms. If you're not going to talk, it means you're not doing anything. So if you're silent, it means you're not doing anything. So just start talking, just start sharing. So ultimately sharing will help you to grow together. So I think just talk. That's it.
It's important to start talking. That's one thing that I'm taking away from you. Very interesting question here. I mean, obviously you're almost getting a celebrity status. So everybody wants to know things like what's the process. So आप तैयारी कैसे करते हैं अपनी class की is one question that's coming up. How do you prepare for a typical class or a session or a year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually combine 2 or 3 topics together. And then considering the nature of those 2-3 topics, then I set up my strategy, whether I should go for whether I should design a project for this, or whether I should give them the beyond classroom experiments, or whether I should create a digital content for them. So it's really based on the group of content that I've created for them, or the chapters I have created for them. And based on the content, then I design my strategy, and then I start building my lesson plan. So I do have my own lesson plans, what my students should be doing, I should be doing, and then later on what will be the extended learning experiences for them. So I more rely on student-centric approach in the classroom, rather than I'm teaching them, rather than I'm giving them the lecture, rather than I'm explaining the concept. I want my students to learn themselves. I'm just helping them to learn in a better way. They learn actually themselves, but I'm there to help them to learn in a better way. That's my role.
Thanks a lot, Ranjit, for your time. And as we speak, we have some more voices from the ground today. And I will invite Sangeeta, who's been with Kevalya Foundation, works very closely with a lot of teachers across India. And she's brought 3 inspiring teachers from the ground. Over to you, Sangeeta. Why don't you help us understand their stories? And I hope all the audience here is able to see the real spirit of Nexus of Good is that there is so much good happening. Ranjit is one example, but you have got 3 interesting participants today with you. So over to you. Look forward to listening to that story.
Thank you, Vinod. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Ranjit sir, thank you so much. आपके जैसे शिक्षक जो हैं वो इंस्पिरेशन हैं सभी टीचर्स के लिए और सभी पेरेंट्स के लिए जिनको आपने जगाया अपना दायित्व निभाने के लिए। तो कोरोना काल के चलते देश के स्कूल बंद थे मार्च 2020 से और बहुत सारे प्राइवेट स्कूलों में तो बच्चे ऑनलाइन शिक्षा से पढ़ रहे थे, पर क्या हमारे सरकारी स्कूल के बच्चे भी कोई शिक्षा प्राप्त कर रहे थे? आइए जानने के लिए चलते हैं हमारे 3 शिक्षकों के पास और मैं पहले इंट्रोड्यूस करना चाहूंगी आपको रूही सुल्ताना मैम से। रूही सुल्ताना जी जम्मू कश्मीर में कश्मीर की वादियों को बिलोंग करती हैं और इन्होंने बचपन से ही इन्हें पढ़ने पढ़ाने का बहुत शौक रहा है। इन्होंने उर्दू और कश्मीरी में अपना मास्टर्स डिग्री किया है और स्पेशलाइजेशन किया है इंक्लूसिव एजुकेशन में। ये पोएट हैं और हॉबी के तौर पे रेडियो पर ब्रॉडकास्टर रही हैं। आप उर्दू की टीचर हैं और मिडिल स्कूल काशीपुरा श्रीनगर में पढ़ाती हैं। She has received multiple awards for creating teacher learning material using waste, which is so amazing. और 2020 में इन्हें नेशनल टीचर अवार्ड भी मिला लो कॉस्ट नो कॉस्ट मेथड्स ऑफ इनोवेटिव टीचर में। सो रूही मैम, प्लीज इफ यू कैन ओपन योर वीडियो, come to us and share the story of Srinagar. Thank you.
सभी सुनने और देखने वालों की खिदमत में मेरा खुलूस और प्यार भरा आदाब, सलाम, नमस्ते और सत श्री अकाल। मैम, इससे पहले मैं और बात करूं, क्योंकि 2G चल रहा है, मैं वीडियो को ऑफ करूं।
जरूर मैम।
अब जो स्टोरी है, साल 2019 जम्मू कश्मीर के लोगों के लिए बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज। लॉकडाउन, तमाम स्कूल बंद, गली कूचे बंद, दरो दीवार बंद, बाजार बंद, गांव बंद, शहर बंद, इंटरनेट बंद। साल 2020 उससे भी बड़ा चैलेंज, यानी कोविड-19। दूर दूर तक जिंदगी का कोई नामो निशान तक नहीं। अगर यूं कहें, कोई हमदम ना रहा, कोई सहारा ना रहा, हम किसी के ना रहे, कोई हमारा ना रहा। सबसे बड़ा जो चैलेंज था, सबसे बड़ा जो इश्यू था, वो था एजुकेशन का। क्योंकि वक्त निकला जा रहा था। खाना तो सभी खाते थे, खाद भी लेते हैं अभी, लेकिन एजुकेशन सफर होती जा रही थी। जैसा कि हम सभी जानते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में वही बच्चे पढ़ाई करते हैं जो गरीब घराने से ताल्लुक रखते हैं, जो बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन से आते हैं। स्कूली बच्चों के घर वाले परेशान, बच्चे परेशान, समझ में कुछ नहीं आ रहा था कि क्या किया जाए। बच्चों के वालिदैन ने फोन लगाना शुरू किया। मैं फोन पे फोन रिसीव करती रही कि बच्चों का मुस्तकबिल तारीकी की ओर जा रहा, सब कुछ सुन्न हो गया था। मेरी समझ में अभी कुछ नहीं आ रहा था कि इस प्रॉब्लम को कैसे सॉल्व किया जाए। चुनौती भरा समा था और इससे भी बड़ी जो गैप है, इस गैप को कैसे हम फिल करें, क्योंकि बच्चों से फिजिकली मिलना नामुमकिन था। अरे बाबा, बच्चे कैसे पढ़ेंगे? मेरा हाल भी वैसा ही था जैसा हर टीचर का, मेन स्ट्रीम में रहकर उन बच्चों को पढ़ाना जो पसमानदा तबके से ताल्लुक रखते हैं, जिनके पेरेंट्स दिनों हफ्तों घरों में नहीं होते हैं, काम की तलाश में घर से निकलना और कई कई दिनों के बाद वापस लौटना। उनका तालीमी सफर जाया होने का था, क्योंकि उनके पास कोई और साधन नहीं था। मनोहाल जो था वो बेहाल था। इसका एक ही सलूशन था, वो था उन तक पहुंचना, यानी ऑफलाइन से ऑनलाइन मोड में आना। ये वक्त की जरूरत थी, अहम जरूरत थी वक्त की। टेक्नोलॉजी तो थी, मैं अपनी बात करूं, लेकिन मुझे पूरी तरह से आता नहीं था। सिर्फ फोन कॉल रिसीव करना, फोन कॉल करना और कुछ नहीं। लेकिन इसी असना में, इसी अंधेरे के आलम में हमें उम्मीद की किरण तब दिखाई दी जब डाइट श्रीनगर ने कवलिया एजुकेशन फाउंडेशन के सपोर्ट से डिजिटल लर्निंग का एक प्रोग्राम लॉन्च किया, वो भी ऑनलाइन। अरे बाबा, इस प्रोग्राम ने मेरा माइंड सेट ही बदल दिया। कहते हैं ना, एक आइडिया जो बदल दे आपकी दुनिया। जो काम मैंने कभी किया ही नहीं था, मैंने सोचा ही नहीं था, मैंने उस काम को करने का अज़्म किया। मगर मेरे लिए ये बहुत मुश्किल था। ये काम करना ऐसा लग रहा था जैसे नामुमकिन है ये सब कुछ, लेकिन मैंने हिम्मत नहीं हारी। काम क्या था? काम था एजुकेशनल वीडियोस बनाना, और हमने एजुकेशनल वीडियोस बनाना सीखना शुरू किया। ये सब कुछ मेरे लिए नया था। पहले वीडियोस में परफेक्शन नहीं थी, लेकिन समय के साथ साथ उसमें बेहतरी आती गई, क्योंकि मैंने कवलिया एजुकेशन फाउंडेशन के वसीम सर को बॉदर करना शुरू किया, दिन में, रात में, सुबह शाम, और उसी के रिजल्ट्स आना शुरू हो गए थे, क्योंकि मुझे वीडियो बनाने आ गए थे। कहते हैं ना, जिंदगी हर कदम एक नई जंग है, जीत जाएंगे हम तुम अगर। मैंने उनको बोला, वसीम भाई, तुम अगर संग है तो मैं जीत जाऊंगी। उन्होंने हमेशा मेरा सपोर्ट किया, क्योंकि मैं उर्दू सब्जेक्ट पढ़ाती हूँ, कश्मीरी सब्जेक्ट पढ़ाती हूँ, जो वीडियोस मैंने बनाना शुरू किए वो 4th से लेके 8th तक मैंने बनाना शुरू किए। अब वीडियोस को अपलोड करना था, अरे बाबा ये तो उससे भी मुश्किल था। 2G स्पीड पे कैसे अपलोड होते, 10-10 मिनट के वीडियोस बनाए और ये भी बहुत बड़ा इशू था। फिर 10 मिनट के वीडियोस के टुकड़े टुकड़े करते थे हम, फिर 2-2 मिनट का वीडियो अपलोड करके बच्चों के साथ शेयर करना शुरू किया। 2G नेटवर्क पे ये काम करना बहुत ही मुश्किल लग रहा था, लग नहीं रहा था बहुत मुश्किल, लेकिन नामुमकिन नहीं, क्योंकि छोटे बच्चे, हालांकि जो बड़े बच्चे हैं वो भी जिंगल टाइप को ज्यादा पसंद करते हैं। अक्सर हमने उनको सुनते हुए देखा था, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया। तो इस चीज को मैंने अपने जहन में घर कर दिया कि बच्चे इस चीज को पसंद करते हैं, या 2 गज दूरी मास्क है जरूरी, ये हर बच्चे के मुंह पे था। तो उसी तरह से उनको ये काम याद भी रहता है और समझ में भी आता है। तो हमने जिंगल्स पे काम करना शुरू किया। स्टोरीज को बच्चे पसंद करते ही हैं, यानी हमने स्टोरी तो दी लेकिन पूरी मॉड्यूलेशन के साथ। इस तरह के वीडियोस बच्चे को बहुत पसंद आए, टीचर्स को बहुत पसंद आए, क्योंकि हमने व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप्स बनाए थे बच्चों के साथ और टीचर्स के साथ। फिर अपने जो वीडियोस थे उनके साथ शेयर करते थे और वो अपनी व्यूज शेयर करते थे। हाँ जी, हमारे समझ में आ गया कि वीडियोस देख के उनके मतलब जो लेसन है उनकी समझ में आ गया है। वीडियोस में प्लस पॉइंट ये था कि मुझे बार बार दोहराना नहीं पड़ता था, वो समझने के लिए बार बार देखते थे, जब सेटिस्फाई होते थे तब कॉल करते थे। इसी तरह से ये जो नया फील्ड था मेरे लिए, यानी वीडियोस बनाने का जो फील्ड था, इसने मेरे लिए दीक्षा के दरवाजे खोले। यानी जो मेरे वीडियोस हैं वो दीक्षा पे अब अपलोड हो गए। कम जो ड्यूरेशन उनकी थी बहुत कम थी, मगर शुरू हो गया, जिनको टीचर्स और बच्चों ने बहुत पसंद किया। उनकी रेंज काफी हद तक थी, इसलिए इस नए सफर में मैंने अब तक लगभग 50 से ज्यादा वीडियोस बनाए, जिनका लाभ 5 से 6 हजार बच्चों ने उठाया, टीचर्स ने उठाया, जो मेरे लिए खुशी की बात थी। और ये कहना मुनासिब समझती हूँ कि जो लो कॉस्ट TLM है, उनके वीडियोस मैंने बनाए कि वो भी बच्चों के लिए, टीचर्स के लिए कितने फायदेमंद थे, क्योंकि घर में बेकार जो पड़े चीजें हैं उनका हम कैसे लाभ ले सकते हैं, और जिनको वीडियो की सूरत देकर हम बच्चे को आराम से पढ़ा सकते हैं। न सिर्फ इतना, बल्कि जब हम बच्चों को क्लासरूम में पढ़ाते हैं तब बच्चे सिर्फ 4 दीवारी के अंदर ही होते हैं, और वीडियोस के जरिए जब हम उन्हें पढ़ाएं उस वक्त सब कुछ उनके सामने होता है, पूरी दुनिया उनके सामने होती है। और तरह तरह से एक, हालांकि अगर हम छोटा सा एक मजमून उनको पढ़ाएं तो हम उनको दिखा सकते हैं पूरी तरह से, मानो बच्चे प्रैक्टिकली सब कुछ देख रहे हैं। तो वाकई की दुनिया की सैर करा सकते हैं। सिर्फ मैं इतना कहूंगी कि इरादे जिनके पुख्ता हों, नजर जिनकी खुदा पर हो, तला तुम खैज मौजों से वो घबराया नहीं करते।
क्या बात है, क्या बात है मैम। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर शेयरिंग दैट। तो व्हाट्सएप ने और वीडियो बनाने का सिखाने की प्रक्रिया जो आपने बच्चों के लिए खुद उठाई इस दौरान, उसके थ्रू आपने जो है वो श्रीनगर के अपने स्कूल के और बहुत से बच्चे जम्मू एंड कश्मीर के आपके वीडियोस को देख के सीखे हैं। थैंक यू सो मच। हम अपनी कहानी को आगे बढ़ाते हैं और जुड़ते हैं एक और शिक्षक से जो झारखंड के दुमका डिस्ट्रिक्ट को बिलोंग करते हैं। वहाँ के झारमुंडी ब्लॉक में वो खुद भी रहे हैं और वहाँ पर अब गवर्नमेंट हेडमास्टर हैं, स्कूल में हेडमास्टर हैं। इन्होंने बहुत से फाइनेंशियल तकलीफों के बावजूद अपनी शिक्षा को पूरा किया। 2004 से पैरा टीचर रहे और उसके बावजूद साथ साथ अपनी डॉक्टरेट की डिग्री हिंदी में पूरी करी। ये इनोवेटिव मेथड्स ऑफ टीचिंग, जैसे रंजीत हमें बता रहे थे, वैसे इन्होंने भी बहुत से मेथड्स ऑफ इनोवेटिव टीचिंग का इस्तेमाल किया है अपने पढ़ाने में, और अपने स्कूल में एक कमरा बनाया है जिसको ये इनोवेशन रूम कहते हैं। इनके एक्सीलेंट काम के लिए झारखंड एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट में इन्हें 2018 में ऑनर भी किया। इन्होंने स्टेट के एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट को सपोर्ट करा है ज्ञान सेतु में, इलेक्शन प्रोग्राम्स की एक्टिविटीज में एज अ मास्टर ट्रेनर। डॉक्टर सपन, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। प्लीज हमें बताएं कि हमारे बच्चे जो झारमुंडी में पढ़ रहे हैं वो कैसे हैं।
नमस्ते सबों को मेरा जोहार। और मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि आपने आज मुझे मौका दिया है। पूरे झारखंड के सभी शिक्षकों की ओर से भी आप लोगों का मैं शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं। मैम, जैसे ही लॉकडाउन की घोषणा हुई, मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं कि मैं उस विद्यालय का शिक्षक हूं जो कि आदिवासी बहुल सुदूर गांव में वो विद्यालय है। खास करके वहाँ बीपीएल लोग अधिक रहते हैं। लॉकडाउन की जैसे ही घोषणा हुई, मुझे काफी चिंता हुई। हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि हमारे विद्यालय में जो बच्चे पढ़ते हैं, इस क्षेत्र में जो बच्चे पढ़ते हैं, वो फर्स्ट जनरेशन लर्नर हैं। वो जीवन में पहली बार उस परिवार में किसी ने किताब को छुआ है। ये कोरोना काल जैसे ही लॉकडाउन की घोषणा होती है, मेरे लिए चिंता की लकीर मेरे दिमाग में इस कदर बढ़ा कि फिर जो बच्चे आए मेरे विद्यालय में, मैंने जो उसे सहजा है, किसी तरह विद्यालय तक लाया है, फिर वो यदि लॉकडाउन रहा, लगातार विद्यालय बंद रहा, तो फिर मैं उसे कैसे विद्यालय तक ला पाऊंगा। एक आंकड़ा कहता है मैम कि चाइल्ड लेबर की बात हो या माइग्रेशन की बात हो या चाइल्ड मैरिज की बात हो, इस क्षेत्र में काफी हुआ करता था। और तो मैं वहां तब से ये काफी कम हो गया था, कम हुआ है। और जब ये लॉकडाउन आपसे पड़ा कि इसके लिए सोचने के लिए मजबूर कर दिया, तो हम मैम हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि हम इसमें सीधे जो है सामाजिक और सांस्कृतिक संसाधनों का हमने उपयोग करने का निर्णय लिया। मैम, हम सबसे पहले विद्यालय को गांव में ले जाने के लिए सोचे, और विद्यालय को गांव में ले जाने का जब विचार आया, तो हम सबसे पहले गांव के लोगों को इसके लिए मोटिवेट किए, लोगों को बताया कि शिक्षा का क्या महत्व है। यदि लॉकडाउन रहा तो बच्चे निश्चित तौर पर इसमें काफी दूर हो जाएंगे। बच्चे नहीं पढ़ेंगे तो निश्चित तौर पर फिर उनको विद्यालय पर जोड़ना मुश्किल था। तो हमने विद्यालय को गांव में ले जाने का जब निर्णय लिया, तो हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि झारखंड के घरों का जो बनावट है, यहाँ का प्राकृतिक जो खुशबू है, यहाँ के लोग, यहाँ के अपने घरों को, यहाँ का जो दीवार बनता है वो काफी प्राकृतिक रंग से उसको बनाते हैं। यहाँ जो उपयोग किया जाता है प्राकृतिक रंगों का, वो उसी का उपयोग हमने एक दो नहीं 100 से अधिक ब्लैक बोर्ड बनाने का यहाँ निर्णय लिया। हमने घर के बाहर दीवारों पर ही ब्लैक बोर्ड एक दो नहीं 100 से अधिक ब्लैक बोर्ड बना दिया। और जब मैम ब्लैक बोर्ड यहाँ बन गया, तो सबसे बड़ी बात थी कि उस ब्लैक बोर्ड तक बच्चों को लाना और कोविड-19 के रूल्स का पालन करना। यहाँ यह समस्या थी कि हम कोविड-19 के रूल्स का पालन करें। हम महीनों से बच्चों को भी पढ़ा रहे हैं और कोविड-19 के रूल्स का पालन कर रहे हैं। हमने सभी बच्चों के लिए मास्क, सभी बच्चों के लिए डस्टर, सभी बच्चों के लिए चौक और 2 गज की दूरी का जो नियम था उसका पालन किया। ये हमारे लिए फायदेमंद हुआ। सभी अभिभावकों, सभी ग्रामीणों, सभी बच्चों ने मुझ पर विश्वास किया। हम इसमें एक बात जोड़ना चाहते हैं कि इस कार्य में हमारे स्कूल के सभी शिक्षकों और वहाँ के ग्रामीणों और अभिभावकों ने मुझे भरपूर साथ दिया। हमने इस बात को जब उन्हें समझाया तो उसका मुझे काफी लाभ मिला। उन लोगों ने मुझे इसके लिए प्रेरित किया कि आप इसे कीजिए और इसमें मैं आपको साथ दूंगा। तब जाकर के ये लगातार ब्लैक बोर्ड मॉडल हमारे विद्यालय के बच्चों के लिए बन रहा है। सबसे बड़ी समस्या थी मैम, इस क्षेत्र में जो गरीबी है और इंटरनेट का जो कनेक्टिविटी बहुत कम है। तो हम झारखंड सरकार ने डीजी 7 कार्यक्रम लेकर के आया। जैसे ही लॉकडाउन की घोषणा हुई, डीजी 7 कार्यक्रम में ऑनलाइन पढ़ाने की व्यवस्था है। लेकिन यहाँ हम ऑनलाइन नहीं पढ़ा सकते थे, क्योंकि यहाँ सिर्फ 5% अभिभावकों के पास स्मार्ट मोबाइल है, लेकिन छोटा मोबाइल है, जिसमें कि वीडियो और ये कंटेंट को वो पढ़ नहीं सकता है, देख नहीं सकता। हमारे लिए काफी ये चिंता की बात थी। ब्लैक बोर्ड बन चुका था, अब बच्चों को पढ़ाने की बात थी। हम बच्चों को पढ़ाएंगे कैसे? तो हम कई तकनीक को जानते हैं। हम जानते हैं कि हम प्रकृति के बीच रहते हैं। हमारा ये पूरा खुशनसीबी है कि हम झारखंड में पैदा हुए हैं और यहाँ प्राकृतिक रंगों से भरा हुआ है। तो मुझे जो पढ़ाना है वो प्रकृति में मौजूद है, चाहे वो वातावरण को पढ़ाना हो या पेड़ पौधे की जानकारी देना हो या समाज को पढ़ाना हो या परिवार को पढ़ाना है। हमने पूर्व ज्ञान को नए ज्ञान से जोड़ने की बात की। हमने मॉडल बिल्डिंग बच्चों से ये किया। बच्चों को अधिक से अधिक खुद पढ़ के सीखने का उसके लिए ब्लैक बोर्ड था। सबसे बड़ी बात यहाँ यह भी है मैम कि स्कूल में टीचर के लिए ब्लैक बोर्ड होता है, लेकिन ये पहला ऐसा जगह है कि जहाँ की बच्चों के लिए ब्लैक बोर्ड हुआ और बच्चे ब्लैक बोर्ड में अब पढ़ने लगे। तो इसमें अब टेक्निक का भी जरूरत था। तो डीजी 7 जो कार्यक्रम झारखंड सरकार जो लेकर के आई, तो हमारे लिए वो मेरे पीठ के पीछे हमेशा लगा कि मेरे भाई के समान वो मेरे पीठ के पीछे खड़ा है। हमने एक छोटा सा वो माइक होता है, उसे मैंने खरीदा और अपने मेरा जो स्मार्ट मोबाइल है उसमें जो कंटेंट आता है उसको मैंने उससे जोड़ा और उसका जो वॉइस है उसके माइक को उसके साथ में लगा करके सभी बच्चों को कंटेंट की वॉइस को सुनाने का हम काम किए। इससे मुझे काफी फायदा मिला कि हम डीजी 7 के कंटेंट को बताने लगे और पाठ्य पुस्तक की भी बातों को बच्चे पढ़ने लगे। बच्चे पढ़ने लगे, लगातार बच्चे पढ़ रहे हैं। हम इसमें जब लगातार पढ़ाई होने लगी और बच्चों का पढ़ाई मनोरंजन पूर्ण हो, बच्चे पढ़े और कुछ सीखे, हमारा उद्देश्य है कि बच्चों का स्किल डेवलपमेंट हो। हम फिर आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि हमारे यहाँ जो संसाधन उपलब्ध है हमने उसका प्रयोग किया है। हमने ब्लैक बोर्ड का निर्माण यहाँ जो उपलब्ध है गोबर, मिट्टी और पानी और पुआल के राख से काला रंग बना करके ब्लैक बोर्ड बनाया। तो हमने प्लास्टर और पेरिस उपलब्ध करके बच्चों के लिए यहाँ काफी प्रत्येक दिन दर्जनों डब्बा चौक की जरूरत है, तो हम बच्चों को चौक बनाने सिखा दिए। अब सीटिंग के लिए नीचे जमीन में नहीं बैठे, इसके लिए हमने मैट ताड़ के पत्तों से चटाई बनाने सिखा दिया। अब यहाँ खरपतवार काफी उपलब्ध है, उससे हमने झाड़ू बना लिया। हम बच्चों को प्रकृति के साथ जोड़ के रखे हैं, उसको बच्चों को लगातार हम बता रहे हैं, इससे काफी लाभ मिल रहा है। हम आपको फिर मैम इसमें बताना चाहते हैं, हम इसमें आपको फिर से यह बात बताना चाहते हैं कि इस बीच में जब ये प्रशिक्षण शुरू हुआ दीक्षा और निष्ठा, ये हमारे इस मॉडल को और भी आगे ले जाने में मुझे काफी मजबूती कर रहा है। वन नेशन एंड वन एजुकेशन प्लेटफॉर्म के तहत पूरे देश को जो कोर्स मिल रहा है, जो सभी किताबों की जानकारी मिल रही है, ये निश्चित तौर पर कई ऐसा है जैसे गणित का शिक्षा शास्त्र हो या विद्यालय आधारित आकलन की बात हो या भाषा शिक्षण शास्त्र की बात हो, काफी कुछ हम सीख पा रहे हैं। चूंकि यहाँ समय कम है इसलिए हम इसको डिटेल नहीं जाएंगे। मैं फिर से एक बार हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि डीजी 7 कार्यक्रम का कंटेंट को बताने के साथ साथ में जी मैम कुछ बोलना चाह रही हैं आप?
नहीं सर,
हम फिर से रखिए। जी मैम, हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं कि यहाँ के बच्चे जब लगातार यहाँ पढ़ने लगे हैं और ये हमारे लिए बहुत मेरे लिए गर्व की बात है कि बच्चे यहाँ पढ़ रहे हैं, तो हमारे प्रखंड में भी हमारे इस मॉडल का अनुकरण किया जा रहा है, यह हमारे लिए बहुत खुशी की बात है। साथ ही हम झारखंड सरकार के साथ में नीति आयोग, साथ में एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एजुकेशन भारत सरकार और साथ ही देश के सभी इलेक्ट्रॉनिक एंड प्रिंट मीडिया के सभी भाइयों को मैं हृदय से उनका आभारी हूं कि उन्होंने हमारे कार्य का प्रशंसा करके मुझे काफी मोरल सपोर्ट किया है। हम इस कार्य को और आगे ले जाना चाहते हैं। हम अपने स्कूल में भी लगातार इस तरह का कार्यक्रम करते आए हैं ताकि बच्चों का सर्वांगीण विकास हो, बच्चे आगे बढ़े, बच्चे इनोवेशन के साथ में नए नए चीज को सीखे, नई तकनीक को हम इसमें जोड़ने का काम किए। हम आपको बताना चाहते हैं मैम कि बच्चे यहाँ संथाली भाषा जानते हैं, तो जब क्लासेस शुरू हुआ तो बच्चों को हम संथाली में किस तरह से बताएं, तो मुझे संथाली जो भाषा है आज के समय में हम पूरा संथाली समझते हैं और मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि कुछ हम बोल भी सकते हैं। जैसे हम आपको नमस्कार करते हैं उसको हम जोहार कहते हैं। तो साथ ही एक चीज और इसमें मैम कहना जरूरी है कि डोर टू डोर जब हमने सर्वे किया तो जो लर्निंग आउटकम्स है, जो उसको हमने ट्रैक करने का जो लर्निंग आउटकम्स आना चाहिए वो काफी मेरे लिए अच्छा है कि वो काफी अच्छा आ रहा है। बच्चे लगातार इतना उत्साहित हैं, साथ ही खास करके हम उस गांव के लोगों को हृदय से आभारी हैं उनके लिए, उन्होंने मुझ पर विश्वास किया। इस कोरोना काल में भी अपने बच्चों को जैसे वो स्कूल में भेजते हैं वैसे ही ड्रेसअप करके प्रत्येक दिन भेजते हैं और लगातार हमारे यहाँ क्लास चल रहा है। यह काफी खुशी की बात है और साथ ही हम आप लोग का भी आभारी हैं कि आज आप लोगों ने मुझे समय दिया है, मुझे अपनी बातों को आपके पास रखने का मौका दिया है। हम अपने जो मेरा ऑफलाइन जो टेक्निक है पढ़ाने का, वो निश्चित तौर पर मुझे मेरे लिए ये कारगर साबित हुआ है, लेकिन इसमें हम जो मॉडर्न टेक्निक है उसको भी हम जोड़ने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं क्योंकि यहाँ संसाधन कम है। काफी हम गरीब क्षेत्र में हैं, ये सुदूर ग्रामीण आदिवासी बहुल इलाका है, हमें काफी कठिनाई है, लेकिन मैम मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि हम अपने कार्य में अपने सहयोगी शिक्षकों के साथ में आज लगातार आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। जी मैम।
थैंक यू डॉक्टर सपन। मैं यहाँ पे एक दो बातें और रखना चाहूंगी कि डॉक्टर सपन ने जो 5% लोगों के पास मोबाइल थे, कम्युनिटी को साथ में जोड़ते हुए उन्होंने जितना असेसमेंट डिजी 7 के तहत शनिवार को होता है वो पूरा का पूरा व्हाट्सएप के जरिए बच्चों का करवाया, और 303 बच्चों का व्हाट्सएप असेसमेंट जो है वो हर वीक होता रहा है, जिसके कारण से जो है वो स्टेट को भी ये डेटा मिलता रहा कि किस तरीके से बच्चे जो है वो ऐसे जिले में भी जहां बिल्कुल इंटरनेट की सुविधा नहीं थी वहां पर भी पढ़ पा रहे हैं। और इनके ब्लूटूथ स्पीकर का जो इस्तेमाल इन्होंने किया और एक ब्लेंडेड मॉडल को सेट किया देश के लिए, आई थिंक वो वाकई सराहनीय है। और यहाँ से हम चलते हैं राजस्थान, और राजस्थान में हम मिलते हैं मुकेश निठरवाल सर से, जो कि शेखावटी गांव सीकर डिस्ट्रिक्ट राजस्थान के रहने वाले हैं। इन्होंने अपनी प्रारंभिक शिक्षा जो है वो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में ही ली, और अपने स्काउटिंग के टीचर से प्रभावित होकर इन्होंने बहुत शुरू से डिसाइड कर लिया था कि ये खुद भी अध्यापक बनेंगे। आज ये जो है वो सेकेंडरी स्कूल में अध्यापक हैं। इन्होंने केमिस्ट्री और ज्योग्राफी दोनों में मास्टर्स किया है। ये बहुत बढ़िया बात कहते हैं कि साइंस और आर्ट्स का मेल होना चाहिए, एंड दैट्स सो ब्यूटीफुल। तो इनके साथ बहुत से अवार्ड्स जुड़े हैं जो इन्होंने एज अ स्टेट रिसोर्स पर्सन, लीडरशिप, निष्ठा, दीक्षा प्लेटफॉर्म की ट्रेनिंग्स दी हैं स्टेट में। इनको एक प्रेसिडेंट अवार्ड भी मिला था अपने स्काउटिंग के दिनों में। तो ये बताइए हमें मुकेश सर कि सेकेंडरी स्कूल के बच्चे किस तरह से पढ़ाई किए राजस्थान में, उसके बारे में हमें कुछ बताइए।
Thank you, Sangeeta ma'am, and all of you. Welcome in webinar Educational Technology. I am Mukesh Nitharwal from Sikar, Rajasthan. जी मैम, मैं मेरी बात स्टार्ट करना चाहूँगा यहाँ से कि जब कोविड-19 से कोरोना काल प्रारंभ हो गया था, उस समय एकदम से ही एजुकेशन लॉकडाउन के कारण बंद हो गई थी। और मैं कहना चाहूँ तो कि जैसे किसी समुद्र या नदी के एक छोर पे पढ़ाने वाले शिक्षक हों और दूसरे छोर के ऊपर स्टूडेंट हों, और वो उनके लिए किस प्रकार एक पढ़ाने का काम करें, तो यहाँ पर एक ब्रिज का काम मैंने दिमाग में आया कि यूट्यूब के माध्यम से हम यह ब्रिज बनाकर बच्चों तक पहुंच सकते हैं। जी मैं यहाँ पर यदि मैं बात करूं तो मैंने 2014 के अंदर यूट्यूब स्टार्ट कर लिया था मेरे एंड्रॉइड फोन में, लेकिन मैंने उसका कभी यूज नहीं किया था। लेकिन अब इन दिनों के अंदर मेरे जो साथी थे उनके द्वारा हमें पता चला कि यूट्यूब के माध्यम से भी हम अपनी पढ़ाई को जारी रख सकते हैं। यहाँ पर बात करूं मेरी, जैसे आपने सेकेंडरी स्कूल की बात की है मैम, 1 से लेकर 8 तक के एलिमेंट्री और प्रारंभिक एजुकेशन, अपर प्राइमरी एजुकेशन के बच्चे छोटे होते हैं, उनको यदि हम थोड़ा गैप देके वापस भी इनको क्लोज कर लेते हैं, लेकिन फिर सेकेंडरी जहाँ पर टर्निंग पॉइंट होता है एक बच्चे का, एक लाइफ सेट होने का पॉइंट होता है, या ड्रॉप आउट होने की संभावना सबसे ज्यादा होती है कि वहां से बच्चे शिक्षा से अलग हट जाएंगे, वहां पर पढ़ाई एजुकेशन जारी रखना। यहाँ पर 22 मार्च 2020 को राजस्थान में लॉकडाउन लग गया था, और मेरा जो इनिशिएटिव, मैंने जो सोच यहाँ से स्टार्ट की, वहाँ मेरे कक्षा 12 ज्योग्राफी सब्जेक्ट और क्लास 10 जो एसएसटी है, सोशल साइंस है, जिसकी मैं स्टडी करवा रहा था, उनके पेपर ड्यू रह गए थे, उनके पेपर कोरोना के कारण हो नहीं पाए थे। तो 2-3 महीने के गैप के बाद में जून में उनकी एग्जाम दोबारा होने की संभावना थी। तो उस दौरान उन बच्चों से हमने व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप बनाकर अटैचमेंट किया, उनको छोटे छोटे वीडियो बनाकर भेजे। लेकिन फिर उन बच्चों का ये मानसिकता थी कि सर हम एक ही सब्जेक्ट के कारण तो पढ़ पा रहे हैं लेकिन दूसरे सब्जेक्ट नहीं पढ़ पाए। तो यहाँ पर हमारे जो दोस्त थे उन दोस्तों से हम मिले, जिसके अंदर हमने एक स्कूल के अंदर इकट्ठे होते और वहां पर हम वीडियो बनाते, जिसके अंदर अंग्रेजी, गणित, विज्ञान और ज्योग्राफी, एसएसटी, इन सभी तमाम सब्जेक्टों को हमने एक साथ लिया। मेरे जो दोस्त ग्रुप थे जिसमें रामदार बदाला एंड टीम के साथ हमने काम किया, और एक अलग ई स्माइल स्टडी चैनल व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप बना के, और उसके अंदर हम सभी सब्जेक्टों को मिक्स करके ढाने लगे और बच्चों को फायदेमंद होने लगा। लेकिन यहाँ पर हमारा जो परेशानियां थी वो कम नहीं थी। हमें जिस प्रकार हुई, मैं कह रहे थे कि हमें आ नहीं रहा था, क्योंकि एजुकेशन से जुड़े हुए थे, हम टेक्नोलॉजी से जुड़े हुए नहीं थे, तो हमें वीडियो बनाना, एडिट करना, ये सारी परेशानियां हुई। लेकिन जो हमारा वीक पॉइंट था उसी को हमने अपना बेस्ट पॉइंट बनाते हुए यूट्यूब पे ही सर्च करके कि किस प्रकार वीडियो बनाए जाते हैं, किस प्रकार एडिट किए जाते हैं, किस प्रकार थंबनेल बनाए जाते हैं, किस प्रकार अपलोड किए जाते हैं, हमें बहुत टाइम लगा इस चीज को समझने में। लेकिन हम जैसे परिवार के अंदर काम करते थे तो 8 बजे के बाद में, रात को 9 बजे बाद में फैमिली वालों को कहता है कि अब मैं मेरा काम कर रहा हूँ, तो मुझे 11, 20, 11:30, 12 बजे तक में इन कामों को सीखने में लगा रहता था। तो इस दौरान हमने इस वीडियो को अच्छे से सीखा, समझा और अपलोड करना प्रारंभ किया। जैसे यहाँ पर हमें व्हाट्सएप इसमें स्मार्टफोन से बनाने के साथ साथ कुछ प्रॉब्लम होती, तो हमने कैमरे भी हायर किए, स्टूडियो से हमने कैमरे लिए, हमने यहाँ पर माइक्रोफोन लिए जिससे कि आसपास की आवाज़ नहीं आए। यहाँ तक कि मैं मेरे सभी दर्शकों को ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि जब गर्मियों मई और जून के जो यहाँ पे राजस्थान की बहुत अधिक धूप और लू की स्थिति थी, उस समय जब हम छुट्टियों में लोग घर पे रह रहे थे, हम स्कूल में इकट्ठे होते तो गांव वाले लोग कहते थे कि आप यहाँ पे क्यों आ रहे हो, छुट्टियों में सब घर रह रहे हैं। लेकिन हम हमारे काम को जारी रखा। साथ ही एक दूसरा दर्द ये था कि हमारे प्लस पॉइंट ये था कि हमारे जो वीडियोज हमने बनाए वो कम संख्या में लोगों तक, बच्चों तक पहुंच पा रहे थे। उसी दौरान राज्य सरकार ने स्माइल प्रोग्राम लॉन्च किया और हमारे जितने भी वीडियो बनाए हुए थे उन्होंने स्माइल प्रोग्राम के अंदर RSCRT उदयपुर के माध्यम से उनको देखा, उन्होंने वहां पे मंगवाया, हमने भेजा, वहां पे सिलेक्शन हुए और ऑल राजस्थान के अंदर हमारे वीडियो स्माइल प्रोग्राम के तहत बच्चों तक पहुंचे। ये हमें खुशी की बात है। साथ ही जैसे हम बच्चों के साथ पहुंच बना चुके थे, समय ये लगा कि जब राज्य सरकार इस कोरोना काल के अंदर बच्चों को एजुकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी से जोड़ते हुए यदि पढ़ाने की कोशिश कर रही है, तो जब हम यहाँ पर हमारी जो साइंस और आर्ट्स की जो टीम है, जो हम इतनी मेहनत कर रहे हैं, तो इसको समझ पा रहे हैं, तो जो अन्य शिक्षक हैं वो इस बात को कैसे समझेंगे, कैसे सीखेंगे। तो इस दर्द को दूर करने के लिए बच्चों के साथ साथ मैंने यहाँ पर एक इनिशिएटिव और लिया कि यहाँ पर शिक्षकों के साथ जितने भी एजुकेशनल वीडियोस थे वो तैयार किए, जिसके अंदर राज्य सरकार के जो प्रोग्राम्स आ रहे हैं, जो ऑर्डर्स आ रहे हैं, जो आदेश आ रहे हैं, शाला दर्पण है या ई स्माइल कंटेंट है। उदाहरण के लिए बताऊं, जैसे आओ सीखे घर के अंदर जो क्विज प्रतियोगिता हमारे राजस्थान में शनिवार और रविवार को हैंडल की जाती है, तो वो कैसे शिक्षक समझे और कैसे बच्चे उसको कर पाए, उनके शॉर्ट और सरल भाषा में हमने वीडियो बनाकर अपलोड किए। और इसका नतीजा ये हुआ कि मैं यहाँ पर आज जो मेरा इम्पैक्ट और जो रिजल्ट्स है वो ये रहा कि हमने आज लगभग 111 वीडियोज मैंने मेरे मुकेश निठारवाल यूट्यूब चैनल के ऊपर अपलोड किए हैं। जब प्रारंभ स्टार्ट किया था उस समय मेरे सब्सक्राइबर की संख्या लगभग 150 के आसपास थी और आज सब्सक्राइबर की संख्या भी यहाँ पर 16,700 के अबोव चल रही है और ये दिन हमेशा लगातार बढ़ रही है। यहाँ पर जो जितने मैंने वीडियोज बच्चों के लिए या एजुकेशनल टीचर्स, ऑफिसर्स या फिर बच्चों के लिए जो बनाए थे, उनके व्यूज की यदि बात करूं, व्यूवर्स की बात करूं, तो 8 मिलियन अबोव उनको देख चुके हैं मैम आज तक और लगभग 82 लाख से अधिक व्यूवर्स यहाँ पर मेरे चैनल्स पर विजिट कर चुके हैं। और यदि वॉच टाइम में हावर्स की बात करूं तो ये यहाँ पर 1 लाख घंटा वॉच टाइम हावर्स मेरे मुकेश निठारवाल यूट्यूब चैनल के आज चल रहा है, जो मेरे को एक गर्व की बात है। वो मुझे प्रेरणा भी करता है कि मैं इस प्रकार लोगों के साथ में छोटा सा प्रयास जो मैं मेरे परिवार के सपोर्ट और मेरे जो अधिकारी हैं उनके सपोर्ट से कर रहा हूँ। यहाँ पर राजस्थान के अंदर सिक्कर डाइट, जिसमें मैं सिक्कर से बिलोंग कर रहा हूँ, उन्होंने मुझे इनिशिएटिव करते हुए वहाँ के जो प्रिंसिपल सर हैं, ईमान सर हैं, या वहाँ के जो हेड ऑफ HOD डिपार्टमेंट जो सर हैं, उन्होंने बुलाया और उन्होंने कहा कि क्या हम ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग शिक्षकों के साथ कर सकते हैं जो कोरोना काल में राजस्थान के सभी डाइट्स बंद कर रखी हैं। तो हमने उनका इनिशिएटिव लिया और राजस्थान में सिक्कर डाइट पहली है जिसने ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग, लगभग मैंने 20 या 25 ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग सिक्कर डाइट से जुड़कर की। दूसरे जो स्टेट हैं, दूसरे जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट हैं, जैसे अलवर डिस्ट्रिक्ट है, उन्होंने भी हमारे को जोड़कर प्रयास किया और दूसरे जिलों के अंदर भी हमने ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग यहाँ पर किए। साथ ही यहाँ पर हम दीक्षा और निष्ठा ट्रेनिंग, ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग के लिए जिले में DLM डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल मेंटेनेंस का काम कर संभाल रहा हूँ, जिसमें जो भी समस्याएं शिक्षकों को आ रही हैं वो तुरंत हम उनको समाधान करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। यदि यहाँ पे मैं चैलेंज की बात करूं तो चैलेंज मैम हमारे बहुत सारे रहे हैं। जो एक चैलेंज मैंने पहले बताया कि तकनीकी की जानकारी कम थी, जिसको हमने हार्ड वर्क करके दूर किया और बिना किसी के सपोर्ट से YouTube का सपोर्ट लेकर हमने उस चैलेंज को स्वीकार किया। दूसरा चैलेंज हमारे सामने ये था कि हम बच्चों तक कैसे पहुंच पाएं। जो आप वीडियो बना रहे हो वो दो प्रकार की मेथड से ही जा सकता है, या तो जो देखना चाहते हैं वो सर्च करके देखें, या फिर हम जो देखने वाले हैं उन तक पहुंचा पाएं। तो हमारे एजुकेशनल न्यूज व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप के नाम से पूरे राजस्थान में हमने जो बना रखे हैं उनके माध्यम से हमने उनको प्रसारित किया। एजुकेशन न्यूज फेसबुक पेज के माध्यम से हमने उसको प्रसारित किया। और यहाँ पर जो अच्छे वीडियोस थे वो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट अपने स्टेट लेवल के जो ऑर्गेनाइज जो व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप हैं उनके माध्यम से ऑल डिस्ट्रिक्ट सीबीओज एंड बीओज के ग्रुपों में प्रसारित किया। और वो शिक्षक और विद्यार्थी और जो ऑफिसर्स हैं उन वीडियो को लाइक और शेयर किया। यहाँ पर मेरे जो चैलेंज के साथ सपोर्टर्स रहे हैं उनमें मेरे फैमिली मेंबर्स रहे हैं, मेरी मिसेज रही है जो अभी एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट में ही हेडमास्टर पोस्ट पर हैं, एमएससी केमिस्ट्री ज्योग्राफी से हैं, तो काफ़ी हेल्पफुल मेरे साथ रहा। बच्चों ने और सभी ने परिवार ने मेरा सपोर्ट किया है। अंत में हमारे जो स्टेट के एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर हैं जिन्होंने टेक्नोलॉजी एजुकेशन के ऊपर जोर दिया है, डायरेक्टर ऑफ एजुकेशन जो श्रीमान सौरभ स्वामी सर हैं, उन्होंने आओ सीखें पहल की, स्माइल 1 स्माइल 2, और राजस्थान के अंदर जो बच्चों के पास में, जैसे झारखंड के अंदर 5% की बात कर रहे हैं, राजस्थान के गांव-गांव ढाणी के बच्चों के पास में स्मार्टफोन नहीं था। तो हमारे शिक्षा मंत्री श्रीमान माननीय गोविंद सिंह जी डोटासरा ने दूरदर्शन के ऊपर एजुकेशन को लॉन्च किया और शिक्षा दर्शन और शिक्षा वाणी से संबंधित जितने भी प्रोग्राम है वो लेके आए। तो उनका मैं थैंकफुल करना चाहता हूँ। फिर अमल फाउंडेशन का थैंकफुल करना चाहता हूँ कि मेरे को यहाँ पे टाइम दिया है, और सभी को जो देशवासी मेरे सुन रहे हैं उन सभी को प्रणाम और जय हिंद जय भारत।
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mukesh sir. This was really very inspiring कि हमारे देश के शिक्षक अपना YouTube चैनल बना के लाखों बच्चों तक बहुत क्लोजली पहुंच पाते हैं। और ये सब मैं रिमाइंड कराना चाहती हूँ अपने ऑडियंस को, ये गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के टीचर्स हैं और ये गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के बच्चे हैं जिनके बारे में हम बात कर रहे हैं। सो एजुकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी इज अ रियलिटी इन द कंट्री टुडे। ओवर टू यू, विनोद।
Thanks, Sangeeta, for actually bringing this voice out from the ground. We have Ashish with us. Ashish, can you hear us? Can you speak once just to test your mic?
Yeah, of course, I can hear you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashish. But before we get on to the next presentation, I'm getting a lot of comments, and it's all thanking Sangeeta for actually bringing this voice out. One curious question that is coming out is, when you meet so many teachers who are actually rolling up their sleeves and trying to embrace technology to address the situation where schools are locked down, what's that one trend that you're picking up? What is that one big challenge that you are seeing when you're engaging with so many teachers? And then I'll bring Ashish in very quickly after you answer that.
So I think, Vinod, as I understand this, and we've heard the teachers, मैंने शिक्षकों को ही नहीं पूरे सरकारी सिस्टम को बदलते हुए देखा है पिछले 10 महीने में। टीचर्स, हेडमास्टर्स, क्लस्टर रिसोर्स पीपल, ब्लॉक ऑफिसर्स, डिस्ट्रिक्ट ऑफिसर्स, everybody has embraced technology like no other time before. In 15 years of my career in technology, I have not seen the acceptance of online learning to the level it exists today. So demand is set. I think my question is the supply set? I still feel there's a gap in the kind of specialized contextual solutions जो हमारे networks, हमारे जैसी परिस्थितियों के लिए available हों और कोई specific problems solve करते हो। I think a lot more is now up to us to make this happen.
Thanks, Sangeeta. I think that's a good segue. Ashish, at Central Square Foundation, you've been really focusing on how education technology goes and seeps into specifically our government schools and teachers and students. And here is a report that the organization has done. So I welcome you to kind of set the context of this report, and maybe we can launch it today. And your team can actually take us all through what's coming out of that report when it comes to innovations in technology.
No, thank you, Vinod, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to hear about the wonderful work that is being done by our teachers, administrators. And I agree with Sangeeta that people have wholeheartedly embraced education technology. And it really behooves upon us to look at how we can really innovate and reimagine education, given what we've seen in the last few months. There's been unprecedented demand for EdTech around the globe. So we thought this was an interesting opportunity to really take stock of innovation that's been happening within India, but also outside our borders, and look at it from the perspective of multiple stakeholders: teachers, students, parents, etc. We see clearly a rising demand for EdTech. I think there is also the supply side will take a little bit longer, but I think it is kicking in as they see a real opportunity here. We at CSF, and I really want to thank our team, who's put in a lot of hard work to prepare this primer on how EdTech has been working to transform education. The team looked at and analyzed over 350 global EdTech innovations and has categorized them very nicely. I would encourage people to go through the report. There's some fascinating products. I mean, I know within India there's a lot going on, but out of the global landscape, for instance, there's a product called Ready 4K that used text messaging to engage parents at home very effectively during this period. And there's very strong evidence this was evaluated around impact. There's a product out of China called NoBox that's used artificial intelligence and delivered personalized learning experience for children at home, sort of home-based learning for children. And then many other countries like India, where we need low tech, not just tech. In Tanzania, there's a great example of an AI-based doubt solving engine using simple text messaging. So lots of different examples. And I would really encourage people to look at this report. And to access this report, you can use the links in the chat window. The report cover, I think, will be flashed across the screen. And the link to the report, database, microsite will be shared in the chat window at this point. We also would like to share with you a short video we have prepared to help you visualize a reimagined world with technology. We know that I'd be grateful if we could play that video.
We're just waiting for the team to just play that.
Okay, thanks, Vinod.
There are some technical difficulties. I'll just take a second. If we can move on.
Maybe we'll play the video in a bit. Maybe we'll play the video in a bit, Ashish, so we can kind of move on.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just add that, this is obviously, I believe, a Sputnik moment for EdTech to really play a role in revolutionizing teaching and learning. I think we've seen some estimates that the EdTech market, there's a GSV Ventures report, global market would hit about $500 million by 2026. Since COVID, that estimate has been revised upwards to $1 trillion. So this is education technology has been much talked about. I think the evidence is becoming stronger, and the market is going to be much deeper than we thought. It's not just for India 1 or the developing world, the top tier, but really for the next few tiers as well, because smartphone penetration is ubiquitous. So within India itself, we believe that there's a $2 billion opportunity by next year itself. And this will continue to grow as we go forward and deepen from India 1 to India 2 to India 3. And more products will be created and more evidence will be built as we go along. Shruti, would you like to play the video now?
Shruti, you're on mute. But while Shruti, you figure out, let me welcome Gauri and Kumar to the panel. Welcome Gauri, welcome Kumar till the time that video comes up. And it'll be great to hear your views around the context of this report very soon. I think the video is ready.
Shruti, I think the audio is not working. Perhaps we skip the video and move on to the panel. Let Ashish finish his thoughts and then we can move on to the panel.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. I think we should move on to the panel, but I do want to say that what we've seen, in the last few months also has been that many states have responded with very interesting programs, and I think there's deep learning from those programs. Madhya Pradesh conceptualized the CM RISE program, a holistic learning program for 3 lakh teachers in the state. We've seen that Himachal Pradesh, through its Har Ghar Pathshala program, used WhatsApp-based assessments powered by Convigenius, another partner. And there have been many other states. Kerala has been a pioneer in EdTech, and they've had 16,000 schools fitted out with high-quality digital classroom tools. And KITE has been working with the SCIT in the state. I can go on and on. I know many states have done lots of innovative things, and maybe the panel can dwell on this further. So, Gauri, over to you.
Great, thank you, Ashish. Hello, everyone. This is Gauri Gupta from the Central Square Foundation. Would also like to welcome Kumar Garg, who is the Managing Director at Schmidt's Future. Would request Rashi and Shruti to walk us through the key highlights of the report.
Thanks, Ashish. Thanks, Gauri. And welcome, everyone. I'm Rashi Dhanani from Central Square Foundation. And today, along with my colleagues Shruti Gogia and Ria Handa, we are very excited to launch and share the findings from this report with all of you. Just to set the flow for the rest of the session, we'll begin with a brief introduction to the report. This will be followed by a discussion with Gauri Gupta and Kumar Garg on 2 or 3 select themes emerging from the report. Gauri is the director of the EdTech vertical at CSF, and Kumar is the managing director and head of partnerships at Schmidt Futures. Schmidt Futures does some deep work in the field of learning engineering, and they have recently been conducting a global challenge to identify EdTech tools and platforms that can enhance the teaching and learning experience. We'll hear more from him about Schmidt Futures and their work in a bit. Welcome both of you, and thank you for joining us today. The few key themes that we will hear from Gauri and Kumar on include exploring some promising areas of EdTech innovations, as well as exploring where the white spaces are, and looking at some low-tech solutions that are being leveraged for teaching and learning. To kick us off, I would invite my colleague Shruti to introduce us to the report and the approach it took to arrive at its findings.
Thanks, Rashi. Let me quickly just begin by laying out the objective of this report, right? And we just heard very truly inspiring stories from all the teachers in the last panel. And as Ashish, Sangeeta ma'am rightly pointed out, COVID shutdowns really led teachers and students to resort to EdTech almost immediately, right? And as a response to that, we began this exercise to landscape some of the innovations in EdTech across the world. This report is actually a culmination of that exercise, and we try to capture some of the interesting ways in which EdTech has revolutionized teaching and learning. Through this report, we aim to reduce some of the opaqueness and information asymmetry that people have for EdTech, especially when they're new to it. And also to provide a bird's eye view to the ecosystem, especially when the interest in the sector is imminently rising. And also given, as we heard from the panel just a while ago, there's demand for EdTech, especially within the device and connectivity constraints as well. So we are hoping the insights from this report can also facilitate decision-making as EdTech adoption needs to be increased across different contexts. So what was the approach that we actually adopted? As Ashish mentioned, we looked at over 350 global EdTech innovations. We found them via leading EdTech awards, competitions, market research, databases, and even reports that have been published by multiple players. These innovations were then categorized into 9 key teaching and learning interactions, which were spread across the 3 primary stakeholders in any education process, be it teachers, be it students, or be it parents. You can see the 9 interactions on the right-hand side of the screen right now. The teacher-led interactions included lesson preparation, lesson delivery, teacher professional development, which is key, homework, and also how teachers can conduct assessments using different technology platforms. In terms of self-learning, the classical use case of, in the case of students, the classical use case of self-learning emerges, wherein a student is independently driving his or her learning at home, as well as a very interesting and new use case of doubt resolution came up, which is where a student is using platforms to almost get his or her doubts resolved instantly with just a click of a button. Finally, we cannot ignore parents as a part of the student's key learning process, right? So as a part of this report, we did include solutions that not only focused on parent-teacher communication, but also solutions that are targeting parental capacity building to support their child's learning at home. Just to share some of the key insights before delving into the themes, the first one is around some of the hotbeds for EdTech innovation that emerged through our landscape. And what we saw is that EdTech innovation is rampant across the world, and it has proliferated in across range of contexts. However, North America, China, and India emerged as the world leaders for EdTech. While North America has the most number of innovations, it's China that's leading the way in terms of funding for EdTech, right? And India is closely following behind North America and China on both fronts. Just speaking a little bit about what the innovation spread looks like across the teaching and learning interactions that we prioritized for this report. Unsurprisingly, traditional interactions like self-learning, lesson delivery, lesson preparation have seen the most traction, and they constituted almost 67% of the landscape. These are some areas that have seen innovation even before smartphones and other personal devices became ubiquitous, whether it was through computer labs in schools or digital classrooms itself in the schools. However, some interactions we saw need more fuel. As you can see towards the right-hand side of this graph on the screen, teacher professional development, parental participation have lacked funding and are in a dire need of innovation support. This is particularly interesting given the fact that TPD and parental participation have also seen some evidence. Just as I speak of evidence, we thought it would be very useful to share what we saw about evidence on the landscape that we had of innovations in this report. As you can see from this graph, a lot of innovations in our landscape did not have rigorous experimental studies backing them. However, the kind of evaluation that does exist, it's led by product company conducted internal evaluations, but there are also around 10% of the innovations in the landscape that have been evaluated through randomized controlled trials or other experimental methods, and most of the studies that we found had showed positive impacts on student learning outcomes, as well as other outcomes like social emotional learning for students. Interestingly, while there are a handful of studies on traditional interactions like self-learning and lesson delivery, it is the parent-focused interactions that have been seeing some research momentum, and that's a very, very recent phenomenon. So I would like to end by saying that we are, as Ashish was saying, as we heard from the last panel, we are almost at a Sputnik moment for EdTech, and really we should try our best to sustain the momentum going forward.
Thanks, Shruti. So as the first theme, we'd like to throw some light on these emerging technologies and their potential to disrupt the education space. We are seeing that some teaching learning interactions are being shaped with a lot of force. The number of innovations in the homework and doubt resolution categories have seen exponential growth in the recent past, as has the magnitude of funding that these interactions receive, as we see on the graph here. They've also been able to see massive scale, led primarily by China. The collective reach of the 4 homework products in our landscape from China is about 470 million users. And similarly, the 8 providers of doubt resolution from China serve about 1.7 billion users. As we hear from in the teacher panel today, blended learning is becoming a way of life. And there is a need to seamlessly extend learning from home to school and empower students to problem solve independently. This transition, for example, may be facilitated by platforms that automate the homework process. Similarly, platforms that allow for student queries to be resolved immediately and independently empower students to follow their curiosity and embark on self-led and self-paced learning journeys in environments where access to teachers may be limited. For homework, primarily a teacher-led activity, technology is attempting to automate the administrative tasks of creation, dissemination, compliance, and correction. While there are platforms that address almost singular elements of this process, as we see in categories A to C, what was really exciting was the emergence of some really advanced integrated homework platforms in category D. These platforms leverage technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and image recognition to support teachers by not just making it easy to assign and create personalized homework, but also by accurately analyzing and correcting it, even when it's completed on paper. Without having to spend so much time and effort on creating and correcting homework, teachers now have a plethora of data to help them accurately understand where their students are. We are also seeing some really interesting technologies being deployed for doubt resolution on the right side of this slide. These technologies facilitate increased independence for students to troubleshoot their issues and resolve their queries anytime, anywhere. This shifts the reliance on teachers, parents, or peers, or even the community, and allows the student to be very independent in the learning process. Some interesting solutions that have done this include connecting students to a local or international tutor for a short bite-sized lesson, or the use of image recognition and artificial intelligence to automatically and instantly solve doubts. With increasingly scalable models on the rise, these use cases are likely to generate a lot of usage, demand, and growth.
So Gauri, here's the first question for you. Given the rise in interactions such as homework and doubt resolution, how do you see these use cases of at-home EdTech evolving to support blended learning models in the Indian context?
Thanks, Rashi, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. We're already seeing traction for activities such as doubt resolution here in India. Tools that help students problem solve have largely been successful in contexts where either parents or peers have not necessarily had the time or the capacity to help students troubleshoot their queries. Where you needed to consult multiple people, you're now simply clicking a picture of your problem on the phone. The instant resolution of your question in a simple and uncomplicated manner engages and motivates users to keep coming back to these platforms. For example, we have DoubtNut in India that calls itself an automated solver engine and content repository. And it's seen exponential growth over the last few years, currently reporting about 3.5 million monthly active users. Right? And it's interesting to know that almost 90% of DoubtNut's users are actually coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities. Right? Which means that students across India are looking for anywhere, anytime access. Seeing the value in providing tools for problem solving, the Indian government has also experimented in this space. We find Tara, an automated bot on the DIKSHA platform today, and it can very quickly and easily point students to learning resources based on simple text-based questions. As we had pointed out earlier, there is a need to take this learning seamlessly from school to students' homes to truly deploy a blended model. And there are many examples that we can actually learn from around the world. Zoepan from China is one which is extremely interesting to me. It's a holistic homework platform actually for K-12 that automates the entire homework process for both teachers and students. Interestingly, it has more than 250 million items in its question bank that allows for easy creation of homework by the teacher besides many other interesting tech features. the kind of use case for homework that exists in the Indian context, especially with blended models on the rise. However, right now in India, a majority of the teachers may not necessarily be adequately trained or have the capacity to use these tools and integrate them with their daily instructional practice. The emergence of such tools may also create very interesting alternatives to the traditional homework and tuition segment. In my mind, it's an extremely exciting space to watch out for.
Thank you, Gauri. I think that's some very innovative tech and look forward to how that evolves in the Indian landscape. Kumar, the next question is to you. Huge bets are being made on emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. Through your work at Schmidt, and do share a bit more about Schmidt's work, what are some insights you've gleaned on how entrepreneurs or product companies should leverage these technologies for learning?
Well, it's wonderful to be with everybody. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., which has been the scene of a lot of news. But I'm glad to be talking about human flourishing rather than human decline. I think, well, I want to first just sort of like applaud Ashish and Gauri and the whole CSF team for, I think, putting this report together. I think too often we just sort of jump into problems rather than actually doing the field scans to figure out what's actually out there in the world. And so the benefit of actually doing this work, I think, will be a real value to the whole field. And so I'm hugely appreciative that they're doing it. So Schmidt Futures is a pretty young entity. You know, my background is as a policymaker. I served for President Obama in the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy and worked on educational technology issues throughout that time period. And, you know, when I left the White House, Eric Schmidt, who was the former CEO of Google, was interested in starting a science and tech philanthropic organization, and that became Schmidt Futures. So we just hit our 3-year mark, and we invest philanthropic capital at the intersection of science, technology, and the public good. And one of the programs I oversee under that is called Learning Engineering. And the context behind it, and I think it, you know, intersects quite a bit with the work of the report and the work of CSF, is really the question that we've been asking ourselves is, just as computational biology is the integration between the field of, you know, biology and biotechnology and computer science, where you're actually approaching questions of, you're not reinventing biology, but you're just using much more data intensive approaches to develop new ways of figuring out disease paths and new therapies. What are ways that, you know, as more learning happens online and we can start to use these intensive data approaches, we can actually approach questions around what works and new methods of learning from a highly computational approach. And the thing that sort of jumps out to me about the homework examples and about some of these examples is that there's just like when you actually take a step back, there's just so much we don't know. So I'll give like a basic example. So there's a ton of research literature on this idea of spaced repetition. So spaced repetition is this basic teaching concept of, I teach you something today, I probably should come back to it in a certain amount of time to see if you remember it still. And so when should I re-emphasize it? Should I re-emphasize it tonight with the homework I assign you? Should I come back to it in a couple days? Should I come back in a week? All the research says, you know, coming back to it helps it transfer into learning, into long-term memory. But when should I do it? And if you actually look at all the papers that have been written, nobody actually knows because you actually need to test that idea for lots of students in lots of different experiments, because depending on what your prior knowledge is, your misconception, that might actually be an algorithmic approach. Depending on what we know, there's a range of different options. And so the fact that most learning science research happens with 60 students in one classroom or a couple classrooms, you're just not getting the volume to actually figure out where these strategies work and in what modulation. And so I think the power of these platforms that are starting to pop up, which have really large numbers of users, is not only that that's impressive, but that they actually start to become test beds for us to actually advance much more quickly notions about what's working. So there's a new paper that's going to come out on the assessments platform, one of the platforms we fund that does homework in the US. And one of the researchers, so one of the things that we support them on is just how well can someone use their platform to run a research experiment? Not the ones that they came up with, but just a researcher comes up with. So one researcher came up with this idea to test the idea of, like, let's say you take a math equation. What if you just change the spacing between the 5 times 4 plus 3? Just the spacing. So you're not adding, parentheses. So the formula is not any different. But what they find is, and the people who run the platform were like, this is not going to make a difference. The researcher was like, can I run the experiment? So they ran the experiment in the background where they just changed the spacing. And what they find is, what the research will show is that the spacing totally confuses students. So if you make the things that are addition closer to each other, the child will do that first. And if you make the things that are multiplied closer to each other, might seem intuitive, but like the people who run this platform thought this would totally not have any effect. And we're just literally talking about the visual representation of the equation on a screen. So the thing that excites me about these sort of technological approaches is that you actually need to do wide scale experimentation. You just need to test lots of things against each other in lots of microwaves, because if you only get to try 4 things a year, you're going to be like, well, I should really pick the 4 most important ideas. But if you get to run 1,000 experiments, well, maybe you'll be like, well, how much does the spacing matter? And I think that's going to accelerate our notions of like how this work is happening. So I'm super excited about this space and the role that, and I think India has a huge advantage because India has a huge number of users, has a very active computer science community. And so marrying those 2 things together can make it the global test bed where we can actually figure out how to drive human learning much faster. And so I'm really excited about the moment we're in.
Thanks, Kumar. I think it is very exciting to see that there are some solutions that have managed to reach scale where they can do this kind of testing and really create learning pathways and experiences that are so specific and meaningful for the children. But shifting gears a little bit to our second theme, I think it's also key to bear in mind that as the focus on blended learning increases, right, it becomes critical to engage both teachers and parents to ensure seamless learning from class to home. And consequently, both teacher professional development and parental participation categories become key areas to focus on. Despite their importance, when we did our work, we did not see a lot of innovation in either of these categories of teacher professional development or parental participation. So let's hear some of our key findings on the white spaces where more innovation is needed before diving into a discussion again with you and Corey.
Thanks, Rashi. So as Rashi mentioned, teacher professional development, or TPD, is critical for teachers to continuously evolve in their teaching practice and to sharpen existing skills and build new ones. TPD is also key to ensuring that EdTech is successful and that teachers are able to use technology tools for more effective instruction. Similarly, parent participation is a new and emerging category of solutions as parents are involved in their child's learning today more than ever before. As Ranjit Singh pointed out earlier today, it is critical for parents to meaningfully engage in their child's learning. Evidence suggests that this has a significant impact over a lifetime, and not just a child's academic outcomes, but also socio-emotional outcomes. However, as we see on this slide, both of these areas don't see too much innovation in movement in terms of the number of innovations and the magnitude of funding. The movement that TPD has seen in terms of EdTech innovation has largely been restricted to traditional content and traditional technologies. It has, to some extent, however, paved the way for scaling in-service training with quality. Platforms that allow providers to upload and share their customized courses and content for teachers across geographies can really help with the imminent scaling of institution-led training. Secondly, what's also really exciting here is the scope of micro-credentialing, where teachers can take more agency over their learning and growth and acquire certifications for skills that they master. Third, technology has also provided dedicated spaces for teachers to network and share best practices with each other, a critical component of professional development, as Ranjit Singh ji pointed out. Parental participation platforms on the right have historically focused on building pathways to communication between parents and teachers, or simply sharing activities for a child to do at home. However, with school shutdowns, parents will have to have a more prominent and meaningful role in their child's education. Interestingly, some pilots and studies emerging towards parental participation have all indicated positive and significant impacts on the child's learning process. As Ashish mentioned earlier, Ready for K, a family engagement platform that uses SMS to deliver activity-based content to low-income parents in the US, has been evaluated multiple times through randomized controlled trials, and the approach has shown to accelerate literacy outcomes by over 2 to 3 months over a school year. This has seen some recent traction in India as well. However, data suggests that there is room to really innovate, fund, and experiment with these innovations across these two interactions.
Gauri, parental participation has seen some recent traction in India as well. Looking at the pandemic and beyond, how do you see the role of parents changing in India? And what is the EdTech ecosystem in India doing to bring about that change?
Great question, Rashi. I think due to the pandemic, learning had to be shifted to homes. And it's very likely that in the coming year as well, the number of teaching days will be limited. The in-school curriculum will hence need to be supplemented and reinforced at home. And EdTech, in my mind, is a powerful tool to democratize access to quality learning at home. There is evidence to suggest, as Ria pointed out, that better results, that children perform better when parents are engaged in their learning journey. Ranjit ji also pointed this out in his keynote address. With or without tech, the evidence conclusively shows that parent engagement programs have led to positive impact of approximately 4 months progress over the course of a year on an average. Parental engagement becomes even more critical in my mind for foundational grades. ASAR 2020 showed that relatively few children in school today are first-time schoolgoers. More than 75% of the students have at least one parent who has completed grade 9. The question, therefore, is, are there ways in which we can encourage parents to become a part of their child's learning journey, to help them problem solve, to guide them, and to help them answer questions? The digital divide has been a major concern during the pandemic, but the trends of device penetration at a household level are definitely encouraging. Parents hence become these very critical gatekeepers for device access for students at home today. It is therefore imperative to engage them, help them feel empowered, and build their confidence in the use of technology to teach their kids. And we have come across 2 different approaches being taken to ensure that at-home learning is possible and meaningful for children from low-income backgrounds. One is to ensure that quality learning content that is engaging, adaptive, and personalized for the children exists and is made available to the students. The other approach focuses on ensuring that parents feel empowered and are providing the appropriate nudges to their children to engage with these solutions at home. Solving for adoption and distribution for B2C in India is a tough and challenging issue. However, we've begun to see some very interesting hypotheses emerge, and let me briefly just talk about 1 or 2 of them. Rocket Learning is a WhatsApp-based model that leverages the digital space where low-income parents are already present, works on the community and teacher-parent relationships, and uses a sophisticated pattern of nudges and incentives to engage parents to support their children's learning at home. The second one I would like to talk about is a product that CSF has supported from inception called Top Parent. This is an app that not only aggregates and curates high-quality EdTech solutions, but also creates engaging material on the app to increase parents' own capacity and confidence to engage with their child. Similar to Rocket Lab, it also nudges parents into behaviors that support home learning. Another interesting model is Sarthi. Here, what we really see is the community effects come into play, where local members of the community engage parents to support their children with learning and practice materials to complete at home. And while we find that technology actually stays in the back end, it enables Sarthi to provide the right level of challenge for the children and support parents and children with resources as they need them. In conclusion, I would say that home learning for low-income students will become a noticeable proportion of their overall learning experience. We hope that parents will drive this change in a country like India, where we have strong cultural and social reasons to invest in our child's education. More innovation will occur to support parents to get educated and involved and eventually become better, more discerning users of ed material, tech or non-tech, in and outside school. It is our hope to see low-income parents have a larger voice in the conversation of their children's learning, as we see it happen in the middle and higher income communities. The positive externality of increased engagement is extremely tempting. We may see improved practices and accountability system-wide over a long period of time, I believe.
Thanks, Corey. Those are some very exciting hypotheses and innovations generating traction on the ground. And it's encouraging to see that parents are getting focused attention. Let's turn to our teachers. Kumar, US has had a longer journey experimenting with EdTech and creating solutions specifically for teachers. However, EdTech tools for teacher professional development have evolved relatively slowly. What are some exciting directions that you think tools for teachers overall or for Teachers PD can take?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say, this is one of the areas where COVID, I think, has a potential to really reset expectations. Part of the reason, I think, is in the US context, at least, schools of education and teacher training has sort of lagged what people consider best practice. So even as the field will develop, some of the top education schools will be developing various practices. If you then track how well they spread through the system of teacher professional development, there's a huge lag. But over the past year, all teacher professional development has moved online. And I think one question will be, what models get tested during this year or 2 years or multiple years that are now sticky and people actually prefer them. So just as lots of things are going to have this, now that I know how easy this is, maybe I'm going to stick with it. So I think that's going to be one question. I think the second question is, there's a generational question of how you were trained into becoming a teacher. And so I think younger teachers come in with a lot more availability and access to tools, and sort of the idea that you're going to be getting a bunch of this training online. Just in the US context, the growth of online learning at the higher ed level has really surged. And so if you go back 10 years versus now, I think a third of all basically course enrollment in the US at the higher ed level has some online or blended element to it. And this is before the pandemic. So it slowly had this huge, and so that's going to flow into teacher professional development, which is usually happening at university. I think the exciting or interesting thing for me is that teacher professional development has been very hard from a research standpoint to know what's working. So in a classic in-person model, most experiments in teacher professional development have not shown to have that much impact. I think with an online model, you can just bring a much more of a learning engineering approach and test lots of different formats, and then track those teachers as they then teach and see if those experiments ended up actually having an impact on practice and then on student outcomes. So I think that has a potential to create a lot more flow back into what good teacher professional development looks like. It has if you're an entrepreneur, I think both parents and teachers are pretty good markets. They're not good markets in the sense that, at least in the US context, teachers don't have that much like working funds to be able to go out there and buy their own professional development. But on the other hand, school systems do. So the US, I think, collectively spends $2 billion a year on professional development. And so it's a good amount of resources. And so, and it's not that there's some industry leaders that are just way better. I think it's all okay. It's not amazing. And so I do think for entrepreneurs who want to sort of tackle the market, there's a lot of room for new ideas. One thing that I think like is interesting is that one idea I know people are experimenting with is what are ways that you can actually develop these learning systems where the teacher professional development is its own value add inside the system itself, which is to what extent can you actually expand teacher practice by the way that they're interacting with the system. So often these systems are designed with like the student at the center, and then the idea is the teacher is the coach, and you just sort of take the teacher as a given. But you can actually say like, how are we actually measuring for how well these systems are actually increasing teacher confidence, teacher knowledge, improving teacher practice, the teacher as user of the system. And so, you know, that as a modality is still underdeveloped. Most systems that you come across don't spend nearly as much time on the teacher mode as they might on the direct to student. And I think there's a lot of value actually from the outcome side if you're actually improving the teacher piece of it. And so it's always glass half full, glass half empty. The fact that I think there's less happening here might actually suggest that there's room for new innovators to come forward with interesting ideas.
No, great. Thanks, Kumar. You know, as you've already said, I really do hope we see more solutions that build for the teacher specifically. It's critical that the context for which an EdTech tool is built is married to, the context in which the EdTech tool is deployed. The final theme we wanted to explore in the discussion today was how low-tech solutions are impacting teaching and learning. In interest of time, without going into too much detail, our study highlighted that though most solutions need at least a smartphone to be accessed, very interesting solutions for low-tech, such as TV, radio, feature phones, were popular for interactions such as learning, lesson delivery, and self-learning, right? One of the most interesting use cases we saw was the deployment of artificial intelligence on SMS for a conversational style self-learning experience for a child, or also to help a teacher deliver instruction. Kumar, the final question for this session is for you. As a result of the pandemic, what are some of the most innovative solutions of low-tech solutions that you saw emerging around the world?
I mean, the one that I personally find the most interesting is just texting, which is a lot of behavioral scientists are really interested in texting as an intervention because most people have phones. The features of the phone don't really matter. You have really good response rates, and there's lots of experiments. So texting to help people apply for scholarships, texting to get them to do various activities, texting for medication adherence. There's a lot of sort of interest in those experiments seem to really show some value. And so the idea that texting might be its own modality, I think is really powerful. And I think it's just, people are early. And so there's I think a lot of room to sort of say, how could you integrate it into your existing plan of attack, but also what might be ways for it to reach students that may not otherwise be interacting with the work.
Great. No, thanks, Kumar. And thank you, Gauri, for some riveting insights and taking the time to be here today. It's exciting to see more and more examples of how tech is supporting our learners, teachers, and parents during this difficult period and hopefully beyond. With tech, we can reimagine a world where parents are engaged in their child's learning, teachers can focus on what matters, and students have the right support every step of the way. I'd like to request our audience to check out the report. Links are available in the chat and in the YouTube description of the event, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn using the hashtag #EdThroughTech. Again, thank you to both panelists for being here, Kumar. We do appreciate it. It's almost midnight at your end. And thank you to our audience for joining us, and of course to the Energy platform for having all of us here today. I'll hand it back to Vinod to introduce us to the final session and panel for the day, which also holds some very promising and exciting stories from the ground.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rashi. And I think it's an interesting segue to actually move into what's actually working at a reasonable scale in the Indian context. And it's a privilege to be with Nitin, Pranav, and Shankar to kind of have a deeper conversation in terms of how some of these products which are emerged in the last few years and actually making impact. Nitin, I remember this 3 years back, we were just catching up when read along was still a blueprint in your head and you were trying things out. It's come out so well. I think the proxy for me is the fact that you had to change its name from Volo to read along shows that an innovation that started in India has just taken off. So that shows the potential. Welcome. Shankar, again, we've been at it since 2012, like that little genie that started and has become DIKSHA. Hats off for you to kind of do this, the hardest to do this within the system, to help the government build a platform like DIKSHA with a lot of collaborative force of different partners anchored by EdTech. Super congratulations and thanks for being just in time to serve the nation at this difficult time. DIKSHA not only have served the teachers and the schools, but even the government in the medical staff preparation around the COVID. So thanks a lot for doing that. Would love to hear more in terms of deeper insights. And Pranav, you've been steering this entire adaptive learning piece for a long time. Compared to all of us, you also have an impact to show that it actually works, but have been really steering through how this actually scales in India. So it'll be exciting to kind of have a conversation. In the interest of time, I thought let's structure this. I know most of our products are fairly well known, but as Anil Swarupji said, that film stars don't talk about a product, and the cricket teams don't, their jerseys don't speak about a product. So let's talk about it first. So what I'll do is give you guys one shot at a quick elevator pitch. Let the audience who's watching this know that why your products are successful in India and how they're serving the last mile. So let's start with Shankar. And I know Nitin, Pranav, you have slides to show when you do the pitch, so maybe you can share your own screen. Shankar, why don't you take a stab at an elevator pitch to say, I know elevator pitch is very difficult for DIKSHA, which is so big, so we'll go deeper, but let's start with you first.
Sure. Thanks, Vinod, and it's a great pleasure to be in this Nexus of Good conference. Thank you for inviting me. So when EdTech started off in 2015, very soon we realized how large, complex and diverse the problem of education is, right? The scale of India, 1.5 million plus schools, 250 million children, 9.5 million teachers, 20 plus languages and 60 plus boards, right? And in the last hour and a half, we've seen the kind of EdTech solutions that are there, the kind of players that are there. So what we realized was that there is no single solution that will work, right? So if there is no single solution and if there are a multitude of solutions, what can EdTech do? So then we realized that what is common to all these solutions is they keep using the same building blocks again and again. So if as a country, if we could have those common building blocks, that would help to amplify the efforts of a lot of existing players from government to private sector, including NGOs. So that is what EdTech set out to build, what we call as digital public goods, which are open and free to use. That was when in 2017, based on a conversation between Central Square Foundation and Anil Swarup sir, who would become the secretary a few months ago, there was a need for the government of India to build a national platform for teacher training. And that's when we realized that this is a great opportunity to try out our theory. And so this platform, the National Teacher Training Platform, was built on top of the public digital goods that we had created called Sunbird. So while the initial conversation started less than 3 years ago, since then, a lot has evolved. In fact, to round off the statistics now, DIKSHA is the largest and most diverse education technology platform in the world, government platform. It has more than 11 plus solutions and is implemented in 36 out of the 38 states of India. And that too, the government of India has implemented it in a plug and play model for the states. The states are free to choose when they want to sign up for DIKSHA, what solution they want to use, and content across 31 languages, 100,000 plus pieces of content, including approximately 500 odd courses. And in a sense, thanks to Anil Swarup sir's vision India was prepared to be lucky during the COVID pandemic. And so when the COVID pandemic came, naturally the millions of textbooks, the 600 million plus textbooks that had these QR codes, became a kind of a continuation of the schooling. School stopped, but schooling did not. And the government of India also runs the world's largest teacher training program called NISHTA. Last year, they trained some 43 lakh teachers. This year, when teachers cannot meet face-to-face, how do you do the training? And I think as a country, we should be proud to know that the very same training has been rolled out at 1/20th the cost of last year and at 4 times the speed, right? And all of this through the creation of digital credentials, which the teachers can boast about. Hey, look, this I think Gauri covered that, the idea of micro credentials. So 180 million students plus is the potential reach. And I'll end off by saying a famous line from Bollywood. Picture abhi baki hai.
I don't know, I somehow guessed it. It's coming.
So it's a great start. It's a great start. But to, again, mangle the saying, half done is still well begun. So there's a lot of ground to be covered. And I want to end by saying that I know of at least 6 organizations who are on this call who have been a part of it, in addition to 140,000 teachers from around the country and individuals who have contributed content to DIKSHA, 40 plus government institutions, and approximately 20 plus NGOs across the country who have contributed content, conducted field programs, and even EI. They have kind of kindly open sourced a lot of their content for DIKSHA. And that truly is an exciting model that India can show to the rest of the world on what happens when Sarkar, Samaj and Bazaar come together and create this massive digital highways of learning, which is DIKSHA, into which every state can add on and build what they want. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, the teacher app, I think the library, the teacher library that we created for for teachers, which again Gauri spoke about the white space there, has seen exponential adoption because of DIKSHA. So we're sitting on some 3.5 million teachers clicking on and accessing that content.
Yeah.
And we're waiting and watching how this really shapes up.
Sorry, Vinod, I forgot to add. This is the total usage of DIKSHA, right? It's crossed 2 billion with a B learning sessions and 16 billion minutes of usage. And again, a lot of it triggered by the COVID pandemic. I won't be surprised if next year a 0 or 2 more is added to these numbers. And that's again, not so much something for DIKSHA to be proud of, but that just shows the amount of demand and the scale and diversity of India and how big a problem is that we all need to come together to solve.
Yes. And that's the potential here from a supply side to kind of leverage on. Let me bring Nitin. If you could just quickly take the story. It's been a short but very exciting journey. I'd read along. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me here and giving me an opportunity also to represent Bazaar a little bit in this Nexus of Good. I think the best thing about this Nexus of Good is really the intention, right? And as long as that is clear and aligned, I think great things can happen. So Google में I work on the product side of things, and मैं जो learning and education team है उसका part हूँ. I will use Hindi and English mixed because I saw a lot of comments on YouTube कि थोड़ा हिंदी में बात कीजिए please. तो I work on the product जो हमारा classroom product है वो भी, but I think जो really immensely मेरे लिए fortunate रहा है is the पिछले 2-2.5 सालों से working on a product जिसको हमने बोलो के नाम से launch किया था इंडिया में in 2019 March. So while EdTech इतना vast space है और उसमें हर step पे हमें challenges हैं जो अभी solve करनी है, एक बहुत foundational challenge जो सब teachers भी I think काफी उससे relate करेंगे is कि प्राइमरी स्कूल के बच्चों की पढ़ने की रीडिंग एबिलिटीज, राइट, रीडिंग लिटरेसी, जब तक आप ग्रेड 5 तक हैं तब तक आप कितना अच्छा पढ़ पाते हैं, बिकॉज एवरीथिंग एल्स उसके ऊपर बिल्ड करता है. इफ यू फेल एट दैट स्टेप और इफ यू फॉल बिहाइंड एट दैट स्टेप देन इट accumulates. And our observation at Google was कि there are a lot of these products which are working on either the workflow or solving the administrative problems, and obviously a lot of solutions are based on actually कि teachers को कैसे train कर सकते हैं better, how can they spend more time. But the thought was कि can technology also really come and supplement and help, that can it multiply that force specifically for this problem. So it was a very narrowly defined problem but very focused problem. And as Google, we saw the opportunity कि जो speech technologies है और जो voice recognition है, उस technology में इतनी improvement हो गई है कि there is a scope for us to really bring that to everybody for free, right? And make sure कि बच्चों को हम पढ़ने में मदद कर सकें ज़्यादा. तो premise बहुत simple है बोलो का. हम लोग सभी पढ़ना सीखते हैं जब हम बोल के पढ़ते हैं, right? And we get feedback from somebody around us, like an adult, like a teacher. लेकिन हम जानते हैं कि जहाँ पे भी हम बात कर रहे हैं रिमोट विलेजेस में, जैसे जब टीचर से सुना, वहाँ सब की जहाँ फर्स्ट जनरेशन लर्नर्स होते हैं, वहाँ पे दे डोंट गेट दिस सिंपल अपॉर्चुनिटी टू प्रैक्टिस. सो जो गूगल की असिस्टेंट की टेक्नोलॉजी है स्पीच की, हमने वही टेक्नोलॉजी को लिया और उसको ऐसे पैकेज किया है कि बच्चे अगर 10 मिनट के लिए भी फोन के सामने बैठ के बोलें और किताब पढ़ें, कोई अच्छी कहानी पढ़ें, इंटरेस्टिंग स्टोरी, तो उन्हें लाइव फीडबैक मिलती है एक असिस्टेंट के थ्रू, जिसका नाम दिया है, जो उनकी रीडिंग बडी है, रीडिंग फ्रेंड है, जो ऑफलाइन हो चाहे आप, राइट, वो आपको बताती है कि आप क्या अच्छा पढ़ रहे हैं, जहां आप अच्छा पढ़ते हैं आपको एनकरेज करती है. द होल एक्सपीरियंस को हमने गेमिफाई किया है कि बच्चों के लिए पूरी एक गेम बन जाए. अल्टीमेटली हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव है कि बच्चों को पढ़ने में रुचि कैसे पैदा की जाए, उनको पढ़ने से प्यार कैसे हो. दैट इज द ऑब्जेक्टिव दैट वी स्टार्टेड विद, राइट. So that is the idea. It's a very simple app. It is available for free. It works offline completely. उसकी 3 मेन बातें हैं कि एक वो उसमें बहुत सारी कहानियां हैं जो बिल्कुल फ्री है बच्चों के लिए, और वो 10 भाषाओं में ऑलरेडी ऐप सपोर्टेड है. अब इसका नाम रीड अलोंग है क्योंकि ये ग्लोबली भी अवेलेबल है, बट इट सपोर्ट्स हिंदी, इंग्लिश, उर्दू, बांग्ला, तमिल, तेलुगु, मराठी, अरबिक, स्पेनिश एंड पोर्चुगीज ऑलरेडी, राइट. और उसमें वो दिया है जो कि AI की बेस पे और स्पीच टेक्नोलॉजीज को यूज करके आपको बच्चों की पढ़ने वाली बडी बन जाती है, राइट. In terms of the scale, it's been a very short journey and completely with Shankar की अभी पिक्चर काफी बाकी है और हमें भी काफी उसमें improvements करनी है. But already जो हमारे लिए काफी गर्व की बात है कि इंडिया में हर दिन 2 लाख से ज्यादा बच्चे उस पे 10 से 12 मिनट पढ़ते हैं अभी, राइट. एंड जो हमने भी उसकी इवैल्यूएशंस की विद सत्वा एंड अदर ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस और असर के साथ भी पहले, तो रैंडम कंट्रोल ट्रायल में भी ऑब्जर्व कि जब हमने 200 गांव में, उन्नाव में इसकी 3 महीने की स्टडी की कि जिन बच्चों के पास ये ऐप थी, जिनके पास ये एक्सेस था, उसमें 60% ज्यादा बच्चे विद इन अ पीरियड ऑफ 3 मंथ showed an improvement in a reading level as measured by असर reading levels, right. और इवन एट द लार्जर स्केल डेटा जो हमारे पास है, उसमें व्हाट वी कैन सी कि खासकर बच्चे जो शुरू में कम पढ़ते हैं, जिनकी रीडिंग फ्लुएंसी 35 या 40 वर्ड्स पर मिनट से कम होती है इंग्लिश या हिंदी में, वो विद इन, अगर आप 100 मिनट भी उस ऐप पे ऐसे प्रैक्टिस कर लेते हैं, तो यू कैन सी एनी इंप्रूवमेंट फ्रॉम एनीवेयर अप टू 40 to 60% इन देयर ओरल रीडिंग फ्लुएंसी, राइट. सो दीज आर द काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स दैट आर रियली एक्साइटिंग, जो हमें बहुत एक्साइट करती हैं, मोटिवेट करती हैं इस पे काम करते रहने के लिए. Right, and one of the other biggest success stories here has been similarly कि ऐसा ये scale achieve करने के लिए how important our partnerships have been with the likes of Central Square Foundation, Cavalier Education Foundation, and others, right. And now which maybe we'll talk a little bit later also, we are also working very closely जो UP government का मिशन प्रेरणा है, उसमें भी रीड अलोंग एक इंटेग्रल पार्ट है बच्चों की रीडिंग एबिलिटीज को बढ़ाने के लिए.
So thanks Ranjit for that. Pranav, very quickly, in terms of what's the story from that side of the world.
So the first and foremost, I want to sort of talk about what is the problem that we are seeing, and why technology can actually play a role that is going to elevate the game of the teachers in terms of what they do. So what you see on this slide, it's a slide made by JPAL, which talks about how learning levels are lower than where they need to be, but more importantly, they are very heterogeneous, even when you have the same socio-economic backgrounds of the children. तो जो एक्स एक्सिस में है वो बच्चा अपने स्कूल के क्लास में ग्रेड्स 1 से लेके 8 में है, और जो वाई एक्सिस में है उसका एक्चुअल लर्निंग लेवल क्या है. तो the blue line is where we want all our children to be. हम चाहते हैं कि सारे जो 7वीं कक्षा के बच्चे हैं उनको 7वीं कक्षा का नॉलेज प्राप्त हो, पर जो हम देखते हैं कि उन क्लास में बच्चे लेवल 1 से लेके लेवल 7 तक है, मतलब थोड़े बच्चे ऐसे भी है जिनको अक्षर पढ़ना नहीं आता और थोड़े बच्चे बहुत होशियार भी है जो अपने क्लास से आगे है। तो अगर वो टीचर फुल्ली ट्रेन्ड हो, मोटिवेटेड हो, is well paid, is able to deliver good pedagogy, the problem that the teacher faces is who do you teach and what do you teach, right? Because the average is denoted by the red line, and so in the average 8th standard student is at the 4th standard ability level, but students range in the entire spectrum from grade 1 to grade 8. Now, no matter how good a teacher you are, catering to this diversity, right, where every child is on their own learning path is going to be very difficult. And I think any technology that is being made should be able to adapt to the child's level. So first of all, diagnose कि बच्चे को भी कितना आता है और उससे आगे क्या सीखना है, and then sort of provide content that is very tailor-made to that. And so, just one advice for any EdTech entrepreneur there is to sort of be very cognizant of this well-documented problem in India. The second, the CSF report talked about how little evidence has been out there. So our product has been gone through 3 independent different providers. So JPAL has done a study, ID Insight and Gray Matters. And roughly what they show is that, children are learning at least double, if not more than that, in both Hindi, in maths, and in multiple other languages. And most importantly, what they're finding is that when a software is adaptive, the chances that it helps each student, whether the student is at the bottom end of the spectrum या बच्चा बहुत होशियार है, सभी को उसका काफी फायदा होता है. तो बहुत अच्छे बच्चे हैं वो आगे तेजी से सीखते हैं और जो बच्चों को remedial support है वो भी उनको मिलता है. I absolutely agree that a lot of this conversation is around the role of the teachers, and I think good technology is one that actually helps teachers sort of fulfill their intent. Teachers भी चाहते हैं कि सब बच्चे सीखें और ज्ञान प्राप्त करें, पर उनका स्ट्रगल ये है कि इतना सारा कॉम्प्लेक्स टास्क है. तो यहाँ पे जो है ये टीचर स्कूल्स के करिकुलम के साथ एम्बेडेड है. टीचर्स काफी बच्चों के साथ भी बैठ के जो एजुकेशन से जो डेटा मिल रहा है उसमें स्मॉल ग्रुप इंस्ट्रक्शन भी कर सकते हैं. और अभी जो पैंडेमिक है इसलिए हमने ये सारा सॉफ्टवेयर मोबाइल फोन्स जो बच्चे घर बैठे बैठे भी कर सकते हैं, 1 घंटा भी रोज यूज करेंगे तो उनको महीने में फ्यू GB से कम चाहिएगा. हमने ये प्रोडक्ट ऑल्सो अब 9 भारतीय लैंग्वेजेस में बनाया है, जो कि बच्चे अपनी मातृभाषा में इसको आगे सीख सकते हैं. इंग्लिश सपोर्ट भी है. So this is the current status, and I'll stop here.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think it's very important that we kind of go a little deeper and unpack some of our product and the efforts. And since we're talking about movies, usually people only see the last product and they don't understand the effort that goes behind it. And खासकर जब कोई EdTech का product को conceive करना होता है, there are so many moving parts. जैसे रूही जी, even today she's still with us, but she's on 2G. And that's the reality of a lot of teachers and students. Plus, the landscape changes so quickly. Like Nitin, Shankar, me were still beneficial of a non-linear situation where at least mobile phones are widely there, 2G, 3G is there. Pranav, you started designing a solution which was for a very linear growth, and now suddenly you have to pivot to see how do you get into that non-linear bandwagon. I want to kind of unpack this design element. So there are so many pieces that you're thinking, not just the content, the platform, the UI, UX, and how the distribution will work. What has worked for your individual products? And that always fascinates me. So what's the design element that has worked for your own products? And we can kind of have a popcorn kind of a conversation. Anybody can start. I saw Nitin smiling, so why don't you go for it first? So what's worked for you in your product? Nitin, you're on mute. Nitin, you're on mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's great. And I think if I were to summarize, I think and which is also a design philosophy in Google, so you have somehow benefited from that also, right? कि technology पहले नहीं आती, पहले user आता है, right? So that has been the fundamental thing, और उसके लिए यूजर की वो जो मेन प्रॉब्लम है और कंस्ट्रेंट्स है उनको अंडरस्टैंड करना बहुत जरूरी है, तो राइट, तो हमने वही अप्रोच फॉलो की है रीड अलोंग में भी, राइट। और हमारा एज आई सेड कि ओवरऑल ऑब्जेक्टिव था कि बच्चों को पढ़ने से प्यार कैसे पैदा हो, राइट, उनको ऐसा ना लगे कि उनको ये पढ़ने में एक टास्क दे दिया गया है या पनिशमेंट दे दी गई है, जो कि काफी हद तक बच्चों को लगता है खासकर, राइट, कि अगर उनको बोल बोल के पढ़ना है, प्रैक्टिस करनी है। तो उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से मैं देखूं तो हमने, आई वाज रिफ्लेक्टिंग ऑन दिस क्वेश्चन कि 3-4 चीजें हैं जो मेरे दिमाग में सबसे पहले आती हैं, राइट, कि जो पूरा डिजाइन है एक्सपीरियंस का, वो जिसके जो दिया है, जो हमारी कैरेक्टर है, जो आपकी रीडिंग बडी है, राइट, वो सारा डिजाइन ऐप का और एक्सपीरियंस इस तरह से बनाया गया है कि आपके लिए वो खेल जैसा है और आपके लिए इंजॉयबल है, राइट, आपको उसका फ्रेंड बनना है। दैट इज द फर्स्ट मेन डिजाइन प्रिंसिपल फ्रॉम अ प्योर यूएक्स डिजाइन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू। लेकिन फंक्शनैलिटी के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से जो सेकंड प्रिंसिपल है सिमिलरली वो ये है कि लर्निंग कर्व मिनिमम होना चाहिए, चाहे बच्चे के लिए चाहे पेरेंट के लिए। तो जब आप ऐप यूज शुरू करना चाहते हैं, पहली बार देखते हैं, तो शुड बी एज सिंपल कि भाई जैसे आप किताब पढ़ते हैं वैसे ही बिल्कुल एक्सपीरियंस है उसको पढ़ने का, राइट। बट आई थिंक विद अदर एडटेक प्रोडक्ट्स द प्रिंसिपल कैन बी अप्लाइड डिफरेंटली, बट द प्रिंसिपल रिमेन्स द सेम कि भाई लर्निंग कर्व मिनिमम होना चाहिए। तीसरा है सिमिलरली कि जो हमारा यूजर है, एंड यूजर, उसकी सिचुएशन के अकॉर्डिंग ढालना पड़ेगा आपको अपने प्रोडक्ट को। तो जैसे तुमने कहा, बात की कि भाई 2G 3G के लिए करो, तो हम बहुत शुरू से ही पहले से ये बहुत पहला थिंग था कि यार ऑफलाइन तो चलना ही चलना है, उसके बिना तो नहीं चलेगा। अगर प्रोडक्ट को ऑनलाइन होके ही यूज कर सकते हैं, एंड देयर इज नो वैल्यू, द पीपल जो यूज कर पाएंगे विल बी वेरी लिटिल, राइट। सो वी इन्वेस्टेड अ लॉट इन जो गूगल की टेक्नोलॉजी, जो आप असिस्टेंट से बात करते हैं उसके लिए यू हैव टू बी ऑनलाइन, हम कैसे उसको मल्टीपल लैंग्वेजेस में, इंडिक लैंग्वेजेस में ऑफलाइन लेके आए एंड स्टिल कीप द साइज टू a low and normal, right? And the final thing I think is, which we're discovering, which is also natural, but in our journey it has been an evolution, कि पेरेंट का रोल, टीचर का रोल, जितने भी और सारे जो इकोसिस्टम में प्लेयर्स हैं जो इंटरेक्ट करते हैं एडटेक में, उनके पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से भी सोच के सबके लिए इसमें क्या, हाउ डू यू इन्फ्लुएंस देम, right, and make sure they are also part of the journey, will be very important for actually getting the real usage, agar hum jo real benefit deliver karna chahte hain. So I would say those are the 4 basic design principles, I think.
Yeah, user centricity, keep the learning curve low, be closer to the learner's situation, and then see other agents who are around the learner. Shankar, a massive product, too many moving parts, lot probably people don't even know yet. So what's the design principle that has at least made some of them work?
Yeah, so since what Xstep does is builds building blocks, right? We have no clue how they'll be used, right? It's like you're building Lego blocks and the end user puts it together. So what we do is, we have figured out that education, everything, you can distill it down to just 3 types of interactions. या तो कोई सीख रहा है, learning, या तो कोई किसी को सीखने में मदद कर रहा है, you can call it teaching, but we generalize it to help learn. So when a parent sits with a child and Google read along, the parent is helping the child learn, right? That's the second role. And the third role is administration, right? As Sangeeta was saying earlier, talking about it, right? It's a very, very complex administrative process. So 3 roles are learning, helping learn, and manage learn. Now for these 3 roles, there are 4, again, there's a cycle of 4 things. 1, understand what has to be taught and learned. What are the learning outcomes? What is the curriculum? Then help people to teach these, whether it be teacher training, right? Third, teach the children, the actual learning. And the 4th is sensing, whether it is formative assessment or the summative assessment. And this is a cycle. You finish grade 1, you go to grade 2. The moment we created these kind of simple blocks like a periodic table, then these building blocks, we went to partners like central government, state government, NGOs, and said, "Aap isko kaise use karenge?" And that is how a lot of the solutions came about, including Tara, the chatbot that Gauri talked about, because government wanted something that could talk with the child and facilitate that. So the first design principle is building blocks for a certain user situation. The second is intensive co-creation with partners. especially the partners who will actually use these programmatically. And I'm not talking of end users like teachers, because finally any program to be sustained, there is an owner of the program who puts the funds in, who administers the resources. It is their choice whether and how they want to use the EdTech technologies. If it's DIKSHA, central government. If it's DIKSHA in Maharashtra, Maharashtra government, right? If it is DIKSHA in UP for foundational learning, they'll decide that, you know what, can we use read along? And the last and the most important is what we call as +1. When we think of complex technology, either you say that I have technology and I expect the consumer to walk to me, or you take the technology to the consumer. +1 means with their existing habits, and education is nothing but a set of habits over 10, 12 years, right? We have a habit of using textbooks. We have a habit of preparing for exams. We have a habit of kind of celebrating success. We have a habit of preparing at the last minute, right? Brushing up the day before. These are all habits. How do you make technology reach as close to them as possible, so that it's just one incremental step in what they do, right? You know, Ranjit Singh talked about the idea of QR codes, but to implement that at scale, right, meant a lot of work to figure out how to make it +1 for each of the multiple actors, the state council who will create the content, right? And so thinking of +1 is a very intensive effort on top of creating any technology and on top of any kind of co-creation. It is a very iterative approach. So those are some of the principles that we use.
Especially people who are watching this video who kind of look at from a demand side, one needs to appreciate that this iteration is a perpetual problem. I mean, it keeps happening. Our product changes almost every 3 months. And I don't think in our lifetime we'll be ever close to the final product. There's always changes happening. And hence, as a user, can be very frustrating at times. But some of these +1s that Shankar says may sound very easy, but it takes 7, 8 months to even figure out how that will work in the context of our field. Pranav, as I really picked, I mean, you have to go through from a non-linear opportunity to a linear opportunity, or linear to non-linear. How was that transition? Because it's a huge commitment that you already make in a way you think and they organize. How are you reading that? What kind of design principles are working and emerging in that context?
I think the most important design principle for actually causing learning outcomes to happen, I would say, centered on pedagogy. And I would sort of pick that even above technology, right? And I think just a deep fundamental research on, for each topic, for each learning unit, for each competency, how does a child think, what mistakes are they making? Why are they making those mistakes, and what can we do to remediate that? What are some proven techniques to do that? I think that code is still not cracked, right? So I think, and this is very non-linear in the sense that once you've figured out how a child is measuring length, you don't necessarily have the answer on comparing decimals or the process of photosynthesis or reading a Sanyuktakshar or some of those things. So as painful as it sounds, I think, I would say that the diagnosis of the problem itself, one could peel 3 more layers than what exists today. That itself will yield more solutions. And I think the best parallel we have seen this is in the medical sector, right? We went from not being able to, let's say, measure a body's temperature to like a blood test, to an X-ray, to a 3 Tesla MRI machine, right? And the more progress we made on the diagnostics in medical, it actually influenced the medicines, the surgeries, the treatments that we did, and vice versa. I think they both had a very symbiotic effect on each other. So I think in education as well, like far sharper assessments, far more interactions with students, doing fundamental research on each subject, each topic, and in parallel, building solutions and using those assessments to measure whether that is happening. And for us, I think the beauty was that we have been doing student assessments for 20 years in India, in all states of India, and all different demographics. And just a lot of those insights were at the heart of the technological solution that we built on top of it.
Yeah, and I often seen that. I think the advantage of doing something for a long time kind of brings more insight, and that really helped me because I was running the teacher networks. Getting the teacher product right was much easier. The other thumb rule, I think, is just being, it's such a rarity that you see a successful product, right? I mean, there's so many products that just fail. I spend more time looking at those to kind of see what is not working. One insight that I've come consistently is to what Shankar said, while the user is critical, but you also have to identify the behavior that you want to influence. If that behavior doesn't exist physically, there is no way if you throw a technology in front of it, it will start happening. And if you're anybody who's creating new product, try and avoid putting technology in front of a behavior that doesn't exist. Invariably you'll fail. That's a huge design challenge to change people's behavior at scale. Even though there are successful models, but in EdTech, I've seen that those products are scaling where there is existing behavior, you just start adding a layer of technology, well designed. I know there's shortage of time, but I want to do a couple of more very quick conversations. And it's because we're warming up now. It's rare that we get this kind of opportunity. And Swarup always say that the innovation comes from outside, scale comes from the system. And most of us are actually distributing with the system. If you could share your distribution story. I know, Pranav, we will need a separate webinar for the distribution challenges that you face from procurement point of view. And we have promised Anil Swarup sir that we will probably do one entire session on that. But in generally getting adoption, looks like B2B is working, but what's your insight in terms of what is it that you guys are doing really well, which is giving you this kind of adoption scale?
Actually, I would say we're not doing very well on the distribution side. I think the penetration of smartphones with or without internet in the hands of the child for a meaningful part of the day is so low that and that is one barrier we're facing. We've not yet cracked that. Second is, I think the whole piece around, I mean, from our perspective, learning is a bitter medicine, right? So while there is a certain element of gamification and nudges and support that you can do, at the end of the day, studying is hard work, right? And racking your brains is not the same as playing cricket. So I'm personally feeling a lot of challenges, and I actually do not have a success story in this regard. I think at the moment, we're just focusing on building a better product in more languages, and really hoping that the school system, when it opens up, where you have these students coming every day, you have this captive set, would probably be a much more effective distribution channel than just a direct to home or a B2C approach. Yeah. So yeah, failures.
I don't remember who said it, but somebody said that teaching still is a contact sport, and we're really praying that schools open. And I really hope somebody's listening and opens the school. Nitin, Shankar, what's been your distribution insights or adoption insights?
But I think we have been still very short, like 1.5 years in India. But I think we have tried. At least I have personally for the product, हमने NGOs के साथ भी फेस ट्राई किया है. हमने जनरल डिजिटल एडवर्टाइजिंग जो गूगल करती है, पेड एडवर्टाइजिंग के साथ भी ट्राई किया है स्केल को लाना, और गवर्नमेंट्स के साथ भी किया है. बट आई वुड डेफिनेटली एग्री विद अनिल स्वरूप जी असेसमेंट है कि भाई अल्टीमेटली स्केल, खासकर जिस प्रॉब्लम की हम बात कर रहे हैं, जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में जहाँ पे हमारे बच्चे रियली हैं, जहाँ पे वो हैं, वहाँ पे रीच अगर करना है तो सिस्टम के बिना नहीं हो सकता है. राइट. सो द रीच जो हमें जैसे CSF के साथ काम करके एंड अल्टीमेटली मिशन प्रेरणा के साथ काम करके मिली है, वहाँ पे जो बेसिक शिक्षा का जो उन्होंने प्रोग्राम लॉन्च किया है, तो उसमें विद इन 3 months वी हैड more than 10 लाख इंस्टॉल एंड 20 लाख बच्चे प्रोफाइल्स वी क्रिएटेड. राइट. एंड उसमें जो हम अब अगला फेज पे जैसे उनके साथ काम कर रहे हैं, जहाँ पे a lot of the insights जो हमारे टीचर्स ने शेयर की हमारे साथ, रूही जी और सपन सर ने, राइट, कि जब टीचर्स को आप इन्वॉल्व करोगे और उनके साथ कोई लोकल बिल्कुल कंटेक्चुअलाइज सॉल्यूशन बनाओगे, जैसे कि रोज शाम 6 से 7 शाम को बैठ के मतलब पढ़ना है, जैसे रंजीत सर ने बात की कि भाई अलार्म ऑन, टीवी ऑफ, राइट. तो वो वाला एलिमेंट आना बहुत जरूरी है, राइट, फॉर गेटिंग एनी स्केल, राइट. उसके अलावा B2C डायरेक्टली अगर करना है, then there are ways, but they are definitely much more expensive, will take more time, and not necessarily get you there. NGOs के साथ work, we were immensely fortunate, and we got a lot of credibility, lot of learnings, lot of real-time feedback. I think on the ground कि भाई ये चल रहा है, ये नहीं चल रहा है, ये real problem है, तो समझने के लिए और even measurement के लिए that was wonderful. जो हमने प्रथम के साथ काम किया, साझा के साथ काम किया, KEF के साथ जो हम already काम कर रहे हैं on an ongoing basis. That really gave us a lot of those learnings, but ultimately at the end of the day, they are also hit by limitations in terms of scale, right? So, I think the approach should be कि use the ecosystem to validate, get the market fit, जिसे कहते हैं product management language में, right? और उसके बाद scale करने के लिए how do you make it possible to work really with the system, right? Is the insight there. From my point of view. Shankar,
you're doing the
hardest, right? You're doing the hardest.
Yeah, just to build off. Actually, no, it was the easiest because we decided we'll reach 200 million people, children, right? That was the hard part. Once that was there, a lot of things became easy. If you want to reach that kind of scale, you have to work with those who are already at that scale, right? So the approach we followed is what will work at scale and not scale what works. Scale what works is you create a great product and then you figure out how to crack distribution. In what works at scale, you're asking what will work at scale in a way that the system will accept it, that there'll be demand and usage, and the users have the capability to use it. So what works at scale is our mantra for distribution. It's also design mantra. So as part of that, what we do is, what's the minimum things EdTech can do? And always go with an incomplete solution that will always be co-created with and completed by a partner. And the last part, so that what works at scale is our one-line mantra. But to achieve that, to complete the solution, it is important that the end user gets a wow experience. So for example, with energized textbooks, as one parent said in UP, ab textbooks bolte hain, right? Now, suddenly the same textbooks that you know are talking. We call it same, but different. That's also another way of looking at +1. Everything is so familiar, but once I see that, once I see Google traffic on maps, once I learn something from YouTube, I cannot go back to my normal life. That +1 mindset is not just about incrementalism. It is once you've tasted that, you can't go back to the thing before. And therefore, at scale, you have achieved a level and use that to go to the next level and then to the next level. So working with those who are at scale, working with those who already have the trust of the users, whether it be teachers or parents, right? Working with those who already have great content, working with those who already know pedagogy, know assessment, know research, because that allows us to do the smallest thing possible, which in our case is build those building blocks, right? But they're built for the scale of 200 million children in India.
No, thanks. Very, very insightful. I know this last question, I'll keep it very quirky so that I can unravel something that is always difficult. So often we create products which have multiple dimensions, and it's perhaps some one dimension that just takes off, and there are a lot of dimensions that people don't understand. And you wish that people understand, because that's where you think real change will happen. If you could share, what's that one thing that if people understood about your product that will kind of make you much more relaxed? So we'll go around. And lastly, because COVID has given us a happy exposure, because so much of eyeballs are coming onto our products and solutions, and we're seeing growth. But like Shankar, you said, picture is abhi baki hai, because this is all access. You still need to see how it all impacts. What's one fear that you have that I just wish that this is not something that scale crazily? I want this to be okay, COVID hua, but I want this to stop because this is not where the real impact will happen. So last round, and then we'll close this conversation. Anybody can take it.
Cool. Let me go first. I think a great question to end the session. The first is more than end users. See, end users understand what to do with technology way more than we think. And if they don't understand, it's not worth it. But I think more than end users, those in the audience who are thinking of EdTech, the misconception is don't think of features. Think of the human capabilities that you want to enhance, right? And that is a small but vital difference. And even in this whole teacher training thing, as the conversations happened, as a colleague said last week, the conversation, as more and more people understood the technology, the conversation changed in teacher training from features to teachers. इसके साथ teachers क्या कर सकते हैं, इसके साथ बच्चे क्या कर सकते हैं, parents क्या कर सकते हैं. So especially if you don't know technology, talk human capabilities that you want to be enhanced. Technology will find the answer. And don't start with the technology and see how to make the best use of it, especially if you're not a technology person. The one thing that I'm worried about is too much screen time.
Yeah.
And the generational impact of that.
Yeah, and I think plus one on your plus one philosophy to that, Shankar, on both the points. Ki, as I said, कि technology पहले problem और पहले human जो user है जिसके लिए आप काम कर रहे हो वो क्या. I think though more narrowly from a read-along point of view, I think my wish would be that more people, especially in India, more parents and everybody understood the value of reading at that early age. I think हमारे लिए तो problem वहीं शुरू रहती है कि ये बात आती ही नहीं है वो लोगों के दिमाग में कि पढ़ना जरूरी है इस एज तक, बाकी सब तो बाद में होता रहेगा. So that would be my one wish. My one worry would also be कि exactly too much technology नहीं होनी चाहिए. I think the teacher contact time, the personal contact time, the social time, etc. is absolutely essential. और वो कोविड के बाद होना चाहिए. Technology should always be in a support role. तो बहुत ज्यादा टेक्नोलॉजी स्क्रीन टाइम नहीं होना चाहिए, बट उतनी होनी चाहिए जिससे कि आपको फायदा हो और जो चीजें टेक्नोलॉजी अच्छी कर सकती है आपके लिए, फास्टर कर सकती है, वो फायदा आपको मिले.
I think my biggest worry is that maybe we set the goals too low, right? I think, or the wrong metrics. Like it turns out that sometimes we get happy with number of users or engagement minutes or things of that nature. But are they really making an improvement on the learning front? Even on the learning front, I would say, is it making a threshold difference? So imagine for a minute that a particular software helps a child learn 10 alphabets and another software helps them learn 20 alphabets. Now both of them are not sufficient, right? Because at least in English you need to learn 26 and then pick up and learn words and sentences and so on. So if you don't reach that threshold, you're just sort of still not good enough, right? So my biggest worry is that we set the threshold too low and start celebrating early. I think we need to play the long game and keep our eyes focused on the outcomes that matter.
Yeah, and no, thanks a lot for that. And I really hope that we can do this with a coffee in hand and face to face sometime soon. I really hope that happens this year. Wish you all a very, very happy new year and an exciting next 12 months. And thanks for this time. It was very insightful. I've been tempted to continue, but I don't want to. We all have work to do. Anil sir, thanks a lot for creating Nexus of Good and allowing this kind of an opportunity. Last closing words, your reflection of what just happened in the last 2 hours.
I can start by saying, wow, it started with practitioners. They came up with wonderful, wonderful stories. There is a huge lesson for all of you who came in later from what was spoken in the beginning. I hope you heard them very clearly, because that's your clientele. That's what you got to reach out to. There was a discussion in between on what is happening in the US. I don't know whether those 3 teachers would be able to relate to that discussion. So when you take out a product or a webinar, a seminar or anything, please be very careful of the audience that you're talking to. It could be an internal discussion with such people where you are evolving as a technology, which is good and what can happen. But when you have teachers around, speak the language that they understand. Speak what would be beneficial to them. And think, as a bureaucrat, I shouldn't be telling you how to market your product. But if you are speaking the language which you spoke in between, you're not speaking to the teachers, you are speaking amongst yourselves. So if the objective was to speak amongst yourself, very good. If the objective was to impress the teacher on what you are saying, I don't think that's the language you should be speaking. Because what I discerned in the last session, and I'll start with the last session, was the problem of scaling. And in scaling, since I have been obsessed with scaling everywhere, I said, a good work here and there doesn't really matter. It should have the potential to scale. And I think Nexus of Good is actually, the whole movement is for scaling. And that's where I'm very particular about the audience who I'm speaking to. Now look at how it is evolving, how EdTech is evolving. EdTech is, in a way, being run by people who have deep pockets and have their celebrities in those pockets. where you have B2C. Now, I don't think anyone sitting here would follow that model, want to follow that model. That's not workable. So how do I reach out to them? One way of reaching out to them, because you can't directly go to the consumer, which I am now thinking in terms of a student. I'm looking at intermediaries. Who are those intermediaries who could be leveraged? Some of you mentioned about NGOs. I write an article every week on an NGO doing wonderful work. Every week I do that. And why do I do that? Because to me, the NGOs can be phenomenal intermediaries because they understand the ground reality much better than people living in Bombay and Delhi and Bangalore. So engage with them as intensively as you can. And Nexus of Good is a good platform because there are a number of NGOs on this platform. And there are many more NGOs that are available. So you can't reach out to people directly. Use that intermediation through the NGOs. And some of them are doing absolutely phenomenal work. You have already engaged with quite a few of them. But I think there are more that are available. You have to understand, because I used to tell my own colleagues that there are areas in which you and I cannot go as a civil servant or even as a technologist. NGOs are sitting right there. He or she has the pulse of the people there. What do they want? How do they want? Then you will not be talking to somebody in the US and trying to understand what is happening on the technology front. Then you'll understand and talk to the initial 3 teachers who came to understand from them what they want. So the problem today for me, as I look at it in EdTech, is twofold. One, there's too much EdTech that is coming and the consumer doesn't know what to do. And that's where I wish CSF had spoken that probably in a separate platform they'll speak on how to evolve parameters or institution to evaluate technology platforms. What is a particular platform doing just because a celebrity is talking about it, is creating any impact or doing anything? So that to me is one of the biggest challenges in terms of determining the quality and the capability of a particular technology that is coming in, because that will help you to market. Then the marketing will not be done by a celebrity, but will be done in terms of a scientific understanding of whether that technology is making an impact in the field or not. So right now what we are doing is either we are using the government vehicle to reach out to people as DIKSHA, and people gradually discovering that it is beneficial. There's still no scientific study to prove that. But if we have such institutions which can evaluate a particular tech platform or application, then it would really help. That's one. And the second one, which I spoke earlier, the problem is that since you have so much technology coming in, you don't know how to reach out to people. How do you scale? Like Pranav mentioned, it's still not very clear. How do you scale? And I have already spoken about it. How do you scale? Reach out to NGOs, reach out to teachers, reach out to government officials. As I have often said, that the efficiencies will come from the private domain and the scale will come from the government domain. Now, the problem with some of the private people is, and as with the government people is, they look at each other very suspiciously. All in the government feel in the private sector, they're only making money. In the private sector, they feel everyone is corrupt in the government. And both are totally wrong. So you have to find out people both in the public and the private sector. And that's again, what is Nexus of Good all about? There are good people on either side of the fence. Can we leverage that? So, I mean, I shouldn't be talking so much about marketing part. You all know better than I do. But I was very impressed with the first 3 presentations. I think these teachers have actually demonstrated that despite the limitations that they have, and some of you have traveled deep inside, I've traveled deep inside to see the difficult situations in which these people work. And to have done what they did was phenomenal. If I were you, I would have a longer chat with these teachers to understand what is the requirement. Sometimes हम अपनी जलेबी बना लेते हैं और समझते हैं सबसे अच्छी जलेबी अरे खाने वाला बताएगा मीठा ज्यादा कम है, but we don't look at it. We see we have come up with a product and it's great, and then we come up with this great charts telling us this is working, this is not working. I mean, I'm okay with technology, I'm okay with these statistics that you have, but nothing like talking to people there on the ground. And I wish in a webinar like this if we could have had more teachers coming in telling about the use of technology, how they're using. In fact, all of you should have sat back and listened to these teachers on how they're using technology. And then you'll get the idea how to leverage that and how to scale that. Ranjit Singh Disale spoke. I mean, he's doing a wonderful job. He's been awarded for it. But I was really impressed with the presentation by Ruhi Sultana. The ease with which she was communicating and the language she was using was phenomenal. And that's the skill that someone has to have to communicate. Phenomenal communication, and everyone could relate to it. it was not as if she was having a discussion between just 3 of them. She was speaking to us. In some of the presentations, I found we are discussing amongst ourselves and we are not reaching out to them. And that, I think, is a very important aspect. And finally, I think Nitin put it very correctly, or was that Shankar? That it was Shankar who said it very correctly. It's not you get a product and then scale it. You create a product and you've studied it and it's something which is required for scaling. So you don't have to market it so much. And I think what the reason why DIKSHA is succeeding is that they discovered a gap, a huge gap that existed. And the moment it came up, people started lapping it up and states are coming in. You know, sometimes as I use that, imagery of jalebi, sometimes you create your jalebi and think that it is the best product for it. But that's not the demand there. And DIKSHA actually catered to a particular demand that existed and no one was meeting it. And thanks to COVID, COVID has had very negative aspects, but I think COVID was the time when DIKSHA actually really flourished. The requirement was phenomenal. And the numbers that Shankar gave makes me feel very, very proud. I think you all have done phenomenal work. I loved those discussions. I didn't understand much of it, frankly speaking. I understand technology very little, but I enjoyed sitting with Shankar and his team who used to talk technology. I used to understand a bit of it, but I could visualize the impact that it could have. And I'm so glad. I'm really happy at the numbers that you give, Shankar. God bless you and your team. Please take it to its logical conclusion. As you rightly said, it's work in progress. So much more need to be done. But I would suggest that others in the field of technology should learn from not merely the technology part of it, but the manner in which the ecosystem was managed by DIKSHA, how they reached out to me. I'm no more there, but the persistence with CSF and EdTech engaged with me as Secretary of Education, I think I don't find those examples. I was reaching out to people, but here I remember distinctly a discussion with Nandan Nilekani. His wife had come over in Bangalore. We had such a fabulous discussion. So there was that commitment visible. You have to engage with the government officials if you got to scale, each one of you. And government officials, not merely at the central level, but also at the state level. So I can go on and on this because these days I'm doing the easier part, the talking part. I don't have to walk. All of you have to walk. So I leave it to you. I think you walked brilliantly so far. So much that can be done. But thank you very much for organizing this. Thanks to Vinod and all of you for being here. I thoroughly enjoyed being here, learned a lot today, and I was very happy to see and meet with people like Pranav, who I distinctly remember his wonderful interview that he had and again set the Nexus of Good in motion. And of course, getting to discuss with Shankar and to understand what wonderful work they are doing and how DIKSHA is scaling. I was not so aware of what Google is doing, but I think Nitin made a fabulous, fabulous presentation. I think Google can play a very, very important role because we call it Google Uncle. Everyone at my family, everyone calls it Google Uncle. Yes. Google has the answer for everything. And these days, I'm also accessing a lot of material from Google and learning from it. So I think Google, I was not aware that they have gone this distance on the EdTech front, but I'm so glad you're doing it. I think this engagement should continue and we may have not a webinar, but probably a more closed-door discussion on how to take these efforts that you're putting in forward. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed being here. God bless all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
sir.
everybody.
And thanks for your time. Thank you. Bye.